Thank you all for being here this morning for Hofstra's Civil Rights Day. This is a day that we set aside during Black History Month to reflect on obstacles that communities have overcome, the challenges faced today, and to talk about ways to move forward. The present event is sponsored by the Center for Civic Engagement. Our center's mission is to encourage discussion about local, national, and international issues, and to better equip students and members of the surrounding community to effect the changes we believe we need. An important part of our center is our undergraduate fellows, several of whom are with us right now. I just lost my place. An important part of the center is our undergraduate fellows, and one of whom suggested the theme for this event, and his interest combined with the shared expressions of concern among our fellows about life under the present presidential administration gave rise to this morning's event, an examination of LGBTQIA+ rights under a second Trump administration. And before we begin, I want to thank the staff of Hofstra's Cultural Center for helping organize this and the rest of the events of the day. Athleen Collins, Carol Mallison, and Janine Rinaldi, as always, thank you very much for everything that you do to bring these events together. I also wish to thank Dr. Lisa Dresner, the director of Hofstra's LGBTQ Studies program, for her help in organizing this event. My name is Phil Dalton. I'm a professor of rhetoric and public advocacy. I'm also the director of the Center for Civic Engagement. And I am lucky to be moderating this morning's program because of the esteemed and knowledgeable panel that we've put together. Allow me to introduce them. We have with us first Lauris Wren. Lauris Wren is the Director of Clinical Programs and Clinical Professor of Law at the Morris Deane School of Law at Hofstra. She's the founder and director of the Asylum Clinic and the director of the LGBT+ Fellowship at Hofstra. Since its founding in 2003, the Asylum Clinic, in spite of an increasingly hostile environment, has won every one of its cases, getting asylum, legal permanent residency, and citizenship for hundreds of clients from all around the world. Professor Wren is deeply involved with many community organizations and is the founder of LGBT Immigrants of Long Island. We also have with us Juli Grey-Owens. Juli Grey-Owens, a New York State transgender activist, is the founder and executive director of Gender Equality New York, a nonprofit whose mission is to advocate for transgender, gender non-binary, and intersex New Yorkers. Grey-Owens regularly provides training to local and state agencies, organizations, colleges and universities, and healthcare organizations. She currently trains recruits at both Nassau and Suffolk Police Academies, the students at Malloy University, healthcare workers at Northwell Health and Memorial Sloan Kettering. In 2017, she was recognized by City and State Magazine as one of the 10 people making a difference for LGBT New Yorkers. And in 2019, she was again recognized by City and State Magazine in their Pride Power 100 list, which recognizes the most influential figures in the LGBTQ community in New York. She currently serves on the New York State Health and Bias Prevention Long Island Regional Council, the Suffolk County Executive LGBTQ+ Advisory Board, and the Town of Huntington LGBTQ Task Force. We also have Charlie Arrowood. Charlie Arrowood is a New York State licensed attorney specializing in providing transition-related legal services to transgender clients, including assistance with name and gender marker changes. They currently serve as senior counsel to the Failla LGBTQ Commission of the New York State Courts, where they develop policies and provide education to enhance equity and access for LGBTQ court users. Prior to this role, Charlie was Name Change Project Counsel at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, managing advocacy efforts and offering technical assistance to pro bono partners. In addition to providing name and document change assistance through their private practice, Charlie is chair of the LGBTQ Committee of the Nassau County Bar Association and board member of Gender Equality New York. In 2021, they received the LGBT Bar Association of the New York Community Excellence Award and were recognized among the National LGBT Bar Association's top 40 lawyers under 40. Breath, there's a lot of qualifications and excellence there. So communicating while organizing this event, it was important to our participants for this to be a discussion. We want participation and questions from the audience. So instead of having our guests dominate the time with just their thoughts, we want to invite you all to be active participants and to offer comments and questions as we go. So to begin, we're going to give each speaker a few minutes to introduce themselves, provide their backgrounds, and offer some opening thoughts on where we are with LGBTQIA plus rights in the first weeks of the Trump administration. Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Right ahead.
I'm Lauris Wren, and you heard I'm the Director of Clinical Programs at the law school with a specialty in immigration and specifically with LGBTQ plus immigration. It is a scary time, both for immigrants and people who care about them, and also for LGBTQ plus and people who care about them and who care about, in general, justice in this country. It is both very important to watch and be aware of what's going on, also very important to look towards the future and know what is probably coming at us, but at the same time not to panic, not to be overwhelmed, and not to become helpless because so much has been fired at us at the same time. Charlie and I were commenting before. I have actually started, besides what I have to know for my work, I give myself a limited period of time. I have 2 hours where I can look through the news and figure things out because I can't afford to be overwhelmed. I have clients I have to protect. I want to be involved in fighting back against these issues. If you overwhelm yourself and become hopeless, then we're already defeated. So I hope that both you are informed and warned about many of the very scary things that are coming our way. I hope you are, as I am, inspired by my two fellow panelists and understanding it is also possible to have hope and to fight back. And I hope that we are able to assist you in that part of it in addition just to giving you information about what's going on.
I am much shorter. Just to clarify on my intro, just because I work for the court system now, I don't take private clients anymore, so I can talk to you about, general things, but not, I can't provide individual legal advice. So as you heard in my intro, I now am with the court system, and a lot of what I do now is figure out how the court can be more equitable and inclusive and welcoming for LGBTQ court users and employees. And it's been very interesting for me to see the difference between what's going on at the federal level versus going on in our state court system and our state politics on this stuff. And I'm very grateful that in New York we have a pretty supportive legislature. We have a very supportive court system at this point. But it's a lot being fired at you at once, like Laura said, and you have to orient yourself and not like get carried away by it. Think about what you are able to take action on, what you have access to resources on, that kind of thing. And so like if there's a whole bunch of stuff happening, you want situational awareness, but you don't want to like just let it wash over you and overwhelm you, because that just paralyzes everyone and we're not able to do the work. I will say, so I've been doing this work for like 10, 15 years now, and everyone who did this work, when Trump was elected in 2016, that was our moment of like, okay, what do we do now? And we kind of got there and we figured some stuff out. And this time when he was elected, it feels like kind of the rest of the world felt that, and the advocates were kind of already in their positions to do what they had to do, which was very reassuring for me, and it actually is very good for my own mental health to know the people that are involved in this work and trust them and know that they're on top of things. But it was really great, even like as the orders were coming out, just to see one after another the lawsuits being filed and stays being granted. So things are on hold. All of these things, you're getting these messages that all of these things are happening, and then no one is following through with the, oh, it's been held up in court. It's been struck down in court, or there's a temporary hold or whatever. So they get you panicked with all the messaging, and then the messaging that kind of resolves that doesn't get through. So today, my goal is to ground a little bit. It's not to say that we should ignore what's going on, but what can we actually do, and how can we actually be productive and also keep ourselves safe and mentally well and support each other and all that. How can we set up systems that obviate the need for the government systems? What can we do as a community with each other to make it so that if they take away some lesson plan, that's not going to harm us as much? Or if they take away access to insurance coverage or something like that, that we have other ways that our community can take care of itself that don't depend on external non-community members who don't have our interests even on their radar, let alone they are not the same interests. Our interests are not aligned. Yeah.
So, am I on?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm in a situation where I don't have a legal degree. So the other two people can tell you all about legal stuff. All right. What I can tell you is grassroots organizing and grassroots advocacy, which I've been doing for over 20 years. There's a lot of things going on a federal level that we have to be concerned about, even to a point of when we do have a situation where there is a stay, where the court has said, you must continue to do what you were doing, you can't do the thing you're trying to do. And they've ignored it. So there's not much I personally can do about that, and I don't think there's very much that you can do about that. That's on a different level, on a different battle. But here's what we can do. We are in New York State. New York State is one of the beacons of LGBTQ plus rights. This is a non-election year. What do I mean by that? Well, none of our senators or assembly members are up for re-election in November, which means that this is the session, and the session runs from January to basically beginning of June, where we can get legislation passed that will protect our community. Next year, it's going to be hard because they're all going to be running around worried about being reelected, and they're not going to want to handle, a hot wire issue like any LGBT rights. And that's been true every single year as long as I've been doing it since, I think, 2008. So we need to be aware of the fact that there are things that we can do here in New York State right now. For example, in 2023, New York State passed a SHIELD law, which was going to protect reproductive rights and gender-affirming care. However, since we passed it, we've noticed there are loopholes and there's holes in this legislation. They need to be plugged. And so right now, I think in the past week, we just got bill numbers. And I don't think the bills actually even match yet. I don't think the Senate and the Assembly bills don't exactly match one-to-one, and until they do, it'll never get passed. But they're working on it. I have full faith that that will happen. Once we get those bills matched up, we need to get on the phone, we need to get to Albany, we need to write letters, we need to send emails, we need to organize people to call their legislators. We need to get this bill passed. We need to plug the holes in our shield law. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, my understanding is that the Texas Attorney General is suing a New York State doctor for abortion pills that they sent to, I think, a person in Texas. All right? Gender-affirming care is also on the block. We need to make sure that we protect those kids who come to New York State to finally find sanctuary and find medical care that they can have. We need to protect them. And so that's an example of a bill that we can make a difference in, that we can do something about right now. I will tell you that I have my DVR set at 9 o'clock on MSNBC every Monday through Friday. And basically, I fast forward through it. If I see something at the bottom scroll which is like, I better hear more about this, I stop and listen. Other than that, if it's just, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I just zip through it because I don't need any more oh my God. I really don't. What I do need is a focus on what we can do now that will help our communities. Now, there's a whole lot of other bills that need to be worked on. For example, are we thinking about our transgender and gender non-binary people who are incarcerated in county jails and state prisons? Because with the way things are going, you know that first of all, there are very few county jails and state prisons that allow, for example, a trans woman to be placed in a woman's facility. There are very few. That's work we need to do, because you can only imagine, for example, what it's like for a trans woman to be put in a male prison or a county jail.
I'm going to add to that immigration detention centers as well.
Perfect. So there is work that we can do. Even if we don't get the bill passed, we can start getting people to be aware of it. We can start moving it forward. We can start building support for these bills. So I would suggest that yes, what's going on a federal level is impossible to keep up with and creates a lot of fear. I'm focused on the 3 inches that we can gain in New York State and hold. And tomorrow I'd like to get another 3 inches and hold it. And the day after that, I'd like to get another 3 inches and hold it. Okay? That's how we move forward. We have to understand that. So that's my little thing.
And I just want to add to that, like, with a bigger context, if you expand beyond the past few years of major successes for trans people, at least in New York, in some ways at the federal level, in some other states, big picture, the past few years was a blip. We never have exited whatever era we were in before. There was a moment where we grabbed what we could, and now we're back to the status quo, to some degree, with more protections because we have the state level protections. So not feeling like you went backwards is also really important, because we're inching very slowly, and even if technically like federal things went backwards or whatever, like we've made progress more than we did, or more than we had before, and it, like, every little thing plugs the holes.
Although, Charlie, I would say this is one difference about talking to young people.
Yes.
Students never lived
Right.
in when DOMA was the law,
Right.
so that they only know same-sex marriage being recognized as a whole. They are used to a higher standard of equality, as
Yep.
it should be for LGBTQ
So now
people.
just show them that you won't put up with that.
Which I actually think it's both a huge strength and also potentially a weakness. But the huge strength is they understand what justice means. They understand what equality means, and there's much more of an understanding this is how it should be than there was 25 years ago.
Yes.
However,
Those of us who came of age in that time.
yes, but also I think we all, I particularly worry about young people living through this because they never learned how to live when they were in higher
attack.
levels of attack. They never thought about, if you're in a same-sex marriage and have kids, what will that mean if you drive across the country on vacation, if you, God forbid, get in a car accident and a family member ends up in the hospital, will your child not be returned to you because they're not going to recognize your parental relationship. So anyway, there's a great strength, but also a lot of challenges coming from being a generation that came to age and has known much higher levels of equality.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, though. We hear stories about 1969, the summer of 1969, which is when Stonewall happened. And we hear about the brave LGBT people that stood up to the police and basically fought back against, a police state is what we were really faced with in those days. I think we need to realize that as a group of people that are living during this period of time right now, this is our Stonewall. This is our Stonewall. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to be fun? No. Is there going to be a lot of heartache?
There will be fun. It won't be fun, but there will be fun.
Well, yeah. It isn't fun.
I agree with that. Still,
Yeah.
finding joy is also very, very important. I
Finding
think.
joy is good, but we have to gird our loins, okay? And realize that there's hard work that has to be done. And so if you look back and you hear about Sylvia Rivera or Marsha P. Johnson and you go, oh, they were warriors, they were so great. Well, guess what? Today is your turn. This is your time to make a difference. And I think it's important for us to realize that. So we're constantly looking at how can we promote this? How can we show strength? There are things that you can do right now, and obviously many of you are probably doing it. When you hear about a rally or a march, you show up. That's great. Continue to do that. Start learning about LGBT rights here in New York State because you can make a difference. We can pass bills. We can make New York State a better place. As probably the oldest person in the room, or maybe, I don't know, I'm close to it, I will tell you a little background. Prior to 2003, LGBT people in New York State had 0 rights. And in 2003, activists were able to create a bill called the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act. However, the activists on the ground decided to remove the language that would protect transgender people. And so the bill only provided protection for lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. And we were told at that time, look, the reason we're going to write you out of the bill is because we want to get the bill passed, but don't worry, we'll get you next year. Anybody know what happened? Well, in 2003, the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act was passed. And the following year, nothing happened. And the following year, nothing happened. For 16 years, the transgender community has not had civil rights until January of 2019. However, since that bill was passed, we have had 3, 4, 5 different pieces of legislation passed. So it was like constitutional amendment. So the dam broke, and now we can include proper protections for those of us who are gender expansive. So it can be done. It can be done in New York State. It must be done in New York State. It should be done in New York State. And you're the people to help make it happen.
I also, just going off of that, want to highlight the importance of multi-generational relationships and advocacy work in multi-generational spaces, because you will get the context and the history of what happened and how you can be prepared, and you can just combine brains and make magical stuff, and it's just very cool. But it gives a lot of context, and it's important.
At this point, those of you who have questions are invited to come up to the mic, ask questions, or offer comments, and then we'll get a response from our panel. Don't be shy.
I'm not that tall.
I know what that feels like.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that is so helpful. Thanks, bestie. Hi, my name's Hannah. First off, thank you for being here. I was wondering, with different things that's been passed, especially like I know as I'm a patient at like NYU Langone, and they've passed certain they're not doing, last time I checked, they're not doing gender affirming care. Another thing is a lot of places they're taking the T out of LGBT. What do you think the long-term impact of this administration will be, positive or negative?
Super negative.
That's what I thought, but
I do believe justice and most issues within justice swing on kind of pendulum. You swing over and you swing back and then swing over. Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually said that was a much better indication of justice than the scales of justice. That's not how it works. I think we have several challenges. There's the actual like executive orders that are passed, and of course, on day one, you had the anti-transgender executive order. Even more concerning on a state or local level is the use of funding to compel schools, organizations, nonprofits, and potentially localities to act in a certain way, even where it's not possible to directly order them to do that. There are some limits on that, however, but what I also think we see a lot of is are places being afraid, and so before they actually have to comply in order to save their funding, they do it already, which essentially obviates even the need to go to the further steps that may be struck down in court. But if organizations are afraid of the worst and therefore doing what they know is wrong, I think in many cases, and that's hard to deal with. And I would be lying if I said I didn't think a lot of people were going to be hurt in the next 4 years and possibly beyond. But I also think, like Charlie was saying before, that there are ways to address that. There are ways to try to ensure that care is available. NY Langone, there was a huge protest outside, and it's important to show up on those because they are still capable. It is possible for them to change their position, and it's possible for them to be shamed into doing it. I'm going to both recognize that you're right, some terrible things are happening also, and I think that will have a long-term impact. And even the federal stuff that we're talking about, you think about a transgender woman not being able to get her passport in her right gender, has probably lost the ability to travel, or if she does or they do travel, their lives may be in danger because of that. There is long-term harm happening from many of these things, but there are also ways that all of us, and not just the LGBTQ plus community, but everyone who supports equality, can be working together both to get state protections to try to ensure that the sort of care that is needed and other protections are there, but also to build other types of care.
Yeah, I was going to mention the preemptive compliance, and to me that is, like, I would be on the lookout for places that are doing that are preemptively wiping trans stuff off their website, not doing services, whatever. They're dropping people like hot potatoes, like nobody trusts them anymore. Pay close attention to who is sticking behind people, who is actually doing the work. Because even like the Attorney General's office told NYU to keep giving care.
Right.
Like, they're wrong. So I think we're going to learn a lot about a lot of institutions and people, and I think we should trust them when they tell us who they are and act accordingly.
Right. I'm going to take a different look at this. All of what was said is true, and it is negative in tone. But let's look at it in a different manner. Sometimes people say any publicity is good publicity, okay? The constant terminology of transgender this, transgender that, transgender this, with the fact that people can see that we're being treated improperly and unfairly, takes people who are what we would call the middle of the road, the movable middle we call it, and some of those people are going, wait a minute, that's not right. What do you mean the government can tell you what kind of physical care you can have for your body? That's not right. And so instead of being in the movable middle, they start shifting over as allies to our area. And what that means is that what we can do for ourselves is tell our stories. The worst thing that we could do is hide under the bed. And so the time is now, wherever possible, to make sure that we're telling our stories, that we're letting people know we're human beings like everybody else. We deserve the same rights, the same respect, the same justice. And everything that they do to us is one more negative mark on their side. And it is moving people from the middle towards our side. And so there is a positive in the respect that how much crap can they throw on our community while we still fight for our rights and our justice. So I would suggest it's time now to step up our game.
And I also that's not to discount that everyone has a different role in this situation and day to day even. And if it is not your role in this moment to be out and loud and doing advocacy work, like you have a different role right now, keep yourself safe, keep yourself mentally healthy, like protect yourself. And also, if you're feeling better, that's when you can go. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a balance.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. In terms of the pushback and in terms of what you said, holding on, like taking the 3 inches and then holding on, and then the next day 3 inches and holding on, what do you think that most of the pushback in terms of like the hardest part of holding on to those, like, what do you think the hardest part of like trying to get more and holding on every day? And with the new administration, like what they were just talking about, do you think that there'd like come a point and come a time in which the Supreme Court or Congress themselves would like try and step in, or do you think that's just not plausible at this given moment?
Well, my opinion is that they're going to keep pushing until they push so far that things start breaking down. I mean, just wait for people's returns to not come because the IRS has been gutted. Wait till, you know.
That insinuates I have to file taxes when I'm not a person.
Right. That's
They
true, too.
removed X gender markers. I don't exist. Why do I have to? And I'm not getting any services.
Well, all those things are true, but the reality is that there is going to be a backlash. Kansas farmers who probably were overriding voted for Trump are now being burned because of USAID being, basically shut down. So the wheat isn't being purchased from the farmers, and the farmers are like, what? So the reality is that there's going to be a point where a picture of Trump is going to be, how do you like me now? And most Americans are going to be like, not so much. So I don't know how much damage they're going to be able to do, but from a standpoint of New York State is still very much its own place. And this country was built, believe it or not, on states' rights. Like whatever's not listed in the Constitution of the government means that the states have the responsibility for everything else. And so we can continue to work here in New York State. And I don't think there's any question, at least I believe, even if you go upstate in some of the red parts, people do not want the government making decisions about their bodies and not breaking up families. And so I would say that, yeah, it's going to be hard, and maybe we only get 1.5 inches today, but we have to hold it and we have to build on it. And so my message is a positive one. Let's focus on New York State. Let's do what we can. When we have to push back against federal, let's do it. But when the things are up in the courts and things, there's nothing, as an American, there's nothing I can do except pray. But as a New Yorker, there are things I can do, and I'm going to continue to do that. So bless you.
I'm not as optimistic as you are on the opinions of going too far. I mean, I think that what's going to happen is that Elon Musk is going to slash everything and create havoc, and then Trump is going to come back and return half of it. And everyone will think, well, not everyone, but Trump supporters will think he saved us. I do think in terms of holding on to those 3 inches, and I love your metaphor, it's not tiring. Well, actually, everyone gets tired. It's learning to rest and not to quit. So that you need, so immigration is the primary work that I do. It has long been that anti-immigration activists were much louder than pro-immigrant people, and that's turned legislators against immigration issues. And they decided pro-immigrant people don't vote solely on that. So they vote on this whole array, and they've got nowhere to go, so we don't need to give them what they want on immigration issues. Until people are regularly, and I try to do 5 calls every morning before I start out. It takes 5 minutes. There's actually that app, 5 calls a day or something like that I use. I pick 5 issues, and I call whoever is recommended as a person to call on that. But just with the knowledge that if, on the day that something is coming up, a lot of people call, but then it dies down and no one calls, you're going to lose that. You're not going to keep those 3 inches. If, you're trying to have ongoing rallies to show that people care about this, and people stop showing up because they're tired and they've lost every weekend to, going to a rally, then you're going to lose it. So it's not getting tired, but keeping up your energy so that you can go, and when you do get tired, take a break, rest, and then go back, and you can't stop putting the pressure on. You never won to the point that you can take it for granted and take away the pressure that you're putting on.
Thank you.
We don't have to do anything this time. Hi, thank you guys for coming. I just wanted to ask, I know that there are lots of queer people right now that, given the last few weeks, do feel very called to activism and called to, especially boots on the ground, very visible type work, but are afraid that either that won't do anything, that there won't be any results from that, or that there will be backlash against either themselves or their community for whatever work they're doing. So I was going to ask how you would recommend that those of us who have been in activist spaces prior to this administration encourage them to feel that, 1, their voice does matter, and 2, that even though there is a risk, if you feel comfortable doing it, that risk can be worth taking.
I think, first of all, everyone download Signal, and there are a lot of little organizing things that need doing all over the place. Every project, every group has spreadsheets and needs people to do things behind the scenes. So if you have concerns for your safety, whatever, your job, whatever, there are things you can do behind the scenes. And if you get looped into some of the groups that are working on specific projects and say, I want to devote my time to this, they will absolutely give you things to do, for sure, I think. Jen, I know we have legislative projects. I'm sure we have volunteer work that could be done at GENY,
Yeah, and there are organizations, I don't know if you're aware, for example, Equality New York. Mm-hmm. Equality New York has an advocacy day coming up. I think it's in April, but not 100% sure. But that's a wonderful day to get involved, to be able to do legislative advocacy, to be able to meet representatives and their staff. One of the biggest things that I find is that most New Yorkers may know that there's a place called Albany, and a place called Albany, there's people who make bills and things, but don't know who their representative is, have never gone to the district office, have never given a phone call or even sent an email to them. This is a wonderful time to do that, and it doesn't mean that you have to be out front where News 12 is taking your picture, but it is something that you can do that has an impact, a very positive impact. And again, maybe it's that 1.5 inches or 3 inches that we're holding. That can make a difference. So for those who feel that they can be safe by being out, God bless you, do what you have to do and help what you can. For those who are a little worried about it or need to have a certain degree of stealth or just staying sort of under the waterline, there are things you can do that will help organizations that are doing the work.
Also, like, if you know people who are on the front lines, cook them dinner, watch their kids while they're at the protest. Like, you can support the folks who are on the front lines, and that could be your role.
Yeah.
Also, never underestimate the value of your voice, so that even if you're not on the front page of the newspaper carrying the sign
Someone
at a
might have heard you.
protest, talking to your friends and family changes minds and get support. And as Charlie says, everybody has their role. Understanding the value of your own voice is huge. And resilience is something you just have to learn in activism. That when you're facing being targeted and being treated as less than human, that is harm. Even if you're not facing physical harm, even if you're not going to lose your job over it, that is harm. And recognize that, but also recognize how powerful it is to use your voice and to recognize your own strength.
And to keep being yourself and living and like just being authentic in the face of that harm. Because they can't do anything if we just laugh at them.
Right.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say thank you first. This kind of feels like being like grabbed by the shoulders and being like, chill out for a second.
Good, that was
one of our
It's good. I'm in the PsyD program here, and so I see a lot of queer and trans client one-on-one. I also work in the public school system. And the concerns that I'm hearing from them more are less like what legislation will pass tomorrow and more like who will be emboldened by this.
Yeah.
And who will bring harm to me directly. Which is, and even on a smaller level, like, going to the airport with my partner with the X on the passport, like, which TSA agent is going to decide, like, today's his day and, do that. So I guess with more fear of, like, protections and things not being prosecuted accordingly, like recent, like, murders where things are not being charged as hate crimes or not being perceived that way, what would you say to those people who feel that, like, they won't be protected on a more like everyday level from harm like that?
First of all, New York state law has not changed. It has become more protective for trans people, LGBTQ people. And the Attorney General takes this stuff very seriously. She has a team full of trans attorneys in her Civil Rights Division, and they kick butt, and I trust them with my life. And she is paying attention to actors that do that, institutional actors specifically, but also smaller actors. And so I would encourage folks to use state mechanisms rather than federal, because it's more supportive and there's more of a handle on how that might go. Build your support networks and make sure that you have folks around you who can help you in those moments. And also, again, just like take those people for what they are. They're uninformed, they're confused, they're obviously unhappy with themselves in some way, and you're okay. So whatever they have to say is a them problem, and they can try to make it a you problem. And if there's physical violence, obviously that is a you, But I think that there's a feeling that is more imminent than it actually is in most circumstances. And we walk around kind of looking over our shoulder and in a panic, and if I use my ex, will this be a problem? But no one else is thinking that for the most part. And so we're coming in loaded and expecting something, and that puts us on edge. And so we might respond in a way that escalates when it doesn't intend to. And so just really staying grounded in those moments, learning de-escalation skills so that you can never be the one they say did the thing. You can keep your side of the street clean. You can make sure that you have your ducks in a row. And if people want to act unhinged, that is how they are choosing to bring themselves to that moment.
Can I also just say that hopefully everybody, not just the LGBTQ plus community, but we all play a role in this. So I'm going to first acknowledge that I'm an attorney and I'm also a lot older than you, so I have a lot of leeway that you may not have. I intervene in circumstances. If I see a police officer I think is being inappropriate, if I were to see a TSA person being inappropriate, I don't want that person to feel alone. And I'll say, excuse me, what are you doing? Is there a reason that you're doing that? And then some of the hostility comes at me, which is fine, because then it's at me and not at the person who is more vulnerable than I am.
Who probably
So-
has to deal with that constantly.
Yes. So just saying, same thing, if I'm walking down the street and I think somebody, whoever, including whether it's someone who's LGBTQ, is starting to get harassed, I'm going to slow down and maybe start walking next to that person. So I totally agree with Charlie that while it's reasonable to fear, we are fearing things that at this point are not as frequent as we think they are. But it is true that when people are taught hatred, that they are more violent. And that, rhetoric has consequences, and everybody has a role in trying to stop that. So in addition to, Charlie giving you or others advice on how to handle it if you're the person being targeted, I do want to say to everyone else in the room, it's all of our responsibilities to intervene if we can when somebody is being targeted.
Yeah, and
Bystander intervention, it's called. Google it. It's great. They're a great program.
I would just say that obviously the number one thing is always to be, looking ahead and making sure that you put yourself in safe situations. So especially in my younger days, overdo a little alcohol in a situation that maybe is kind of not a great place to be in, not a good idea. Like, kind of plan out what you're doing. Not that we have to be fearful, we just have to be smart.
And intentional.
I will say, though, one of the things that I agree with Charlie is that as part of the transgender community, we're hyper aware. I can remember going to the post office to buy stamps. And that day I was wearing sort of like an athletic suit, and I had like a bucket hat on. And the postal person across from me was like giving me the stare, and I'm like, oh, crap. He's reading me. So we finished this, and he goes, I really like the way you're rocking the 90s hip-hop look. Oh, thanks. So that staring was not, oh, that's a trans person.
Yeah.
They were like, check the 90s look.
Yeah.
I've had so this is maybe 3 or 4 months ago, but in my waiting room, one of my clients who is transgender came in, and I noticed another client, not one of mine, one of my colleagues, looking at her and just really looking at her. And I thought, well, this is not going to happen in my office. So I kind of hover by the window, and then I hear the second person say, excuse me, and I'm out in the waiting room. And she says, your legs are amazing. Can I ask you what workout you do to get those legs? And my client said, I don't actually work out. And the other woman said, some people are so lucky with the body that they're born with. And I was just like, okay, I'm not needed here. But anyway, the point being,
Yeah.
but my instinct was still right.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yours was right, but the awareness, because again, we're hyper aware. Do I pass? Will I have a problem? Will this person refuse me? Will, all this is going on, all right? And
releasing chemicals in our bodies as that's happening.
yeah,
And exhausting.
stress. Yes, and exhausting. So just be aware, not every person that's staring at you is thinking, oh, you're trans, or oh, you're this. It could be, I love the blouse they're wearing. It could be that.
Could be, I knew you before you transitioned. How do I know you? Because that's happened to me.
You look familiar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's actually smart. Yeah. Sorry, so many short people.
I'm one of you.
Entirely a granular question, but like what rights are protected federally and like not at as much risk, and also what rights are very well protected like state-wise in New York especially? Like just main stuff, and then also like what's most at risk in general.
So state governments handle things like marriage, documents, name changes, birth
Police.
certificates, police, housing, some housing stuff, family law. Federal government handles passports, immigration.
Yeah, so there are things that are specifically federal. So, and they're enumerated in the Constitution, and they including, raising money, spending money, anything federal like immigration, federal commerce, commerce that is interstate. Anything that's non-enumerated to the federal government is for the states. What gets more difficult is what we kind of mentioned before. So the federal government gives funding to the states. I mean, takes a huge amount of money for them, but also gives funding to them. What happens when the federal government pressures the state using funding to do something that actually is the state's right to decide, but now suddenly their funding is in question if they do that. So I don't know how old you guys were when the drinking age went up to 21.
Not born.
But a lot of the states didn't want to do that, and the federal government conditioned some of its transportation, like highway funding, on you have to raise your drinking age up to 21. So there was a big lawsuit about it, and essentially, which said the state is allowed to incentivize, to entice, but they are not allowed to commandeer the determination. They can't force a state to do it, but they can try to lean on them to do it. And so the vast majority of your domestic rights are controlled by the state. So obviously if you're getting a passport or something, that's going to be the federal government. But the real danger will come both in terms of how much pressure the federal government applies, how resistant states are, and I think we are very fortunate in New York that New York will, I think, be very resistant, and what the courts allow, how much pressure the courts allow the federal government to put on the states.
And the funding thing is what's happening with the under 19 care ban and the school stuff. They're saying if you are letting trans kids participate in sports, we'll take your funding. If you're allowing minors to get medical care, we'll take your funding. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how hard the state goes after this stuff, because
and what the lawsuits
Right.
say, because they're
right. It's going to depend on what the decisions all end up being, but we have a state constitutional protection on gender identity stuff. So that is literally our state constitution going up against an executive order, which is nothing. And I think it's going to be really interesting.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
But it's not the same
But-
level of law
Yeah.
as an actual law, and definitely not at the level of a constitutional
Right.
provision.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see how far the Attorney General is willing to, or any other agency that is dealing with this, will they really go to the mat? And then what happens when that question ends up at the Supreme Court? Do they want it to end up at the Supreme Court that exists right now? I think that's a big part of the calculus, because I don't know what they would say. And then we could be in much worse shape. Yeah.
Well, that said, to be perfectly honest with you, prior to Trump, there were very few federal laws that protected LGBT people. To be honest with you, I'm not aware of any.
It was interpretations of
Interpretations,
statute.
but they were not laws. They were not passed. However, here in New York State, we are protected in employment, in housing, and in public services. They call it public accommodations. So, you know, you can go to a restaurant, and whether they like what you're wearing or not, they have to seat you and feed you, you know, type of thing. Where prior to 2019, they could say, please, get out of here. We don't serve your kind.
There are laws, so laws that prohibited discrimination, federal laws that prohibit discrimination based on gender, that then the courts interpreted as including.
Interpreted, but it's
Yes.
it's not codified
It's not
in the law.
specifically stated
Gender
in the law
identity and
that
gender
it
expression.
includes, gender identity and expression.
Yeah.
And that was a couple of the Supreme Court cases from a couple of years ago on the employment stuff. They had a decision where they said trans status is included in all the Title VII employment stuff, and they talked about maybe education.
But, and then, so Trump's executive action, where they said, actually, you guys have all misinterpreted the Supreme Court case, which was completely clear on what it was saying. You know, you've incorrectly interpreted this as protecting gender identity and gender expression when the decision said that it did that. So you all need to go back and understanding that you interpreted that correctly, change how you do your laws.
Had the law stated, though, that it was gender identity and gender expression were protected, there would not be that discussion. It would not be an executive order.
Right.
The Constitution it would have to
Right.
be changed by the Congress.
To add
So-
those words
so
in
Well,
One-
right,
to the
or
statute.
to remove them.
Okay, so one, Trump is actually putting out executive actions that directly constitute laws, and also executive actions should not be allowed to directly contradict court interpretation either. The only thing executive action should be allowed to do is how it can't be a law in and of itself, it's how a law is carried out, how it's executed. But an executive action just can't override the Supreme Court. However,
We'll see.
it will have to be challenged for a court to say that, which is somewhat ridiculous because the court is what he's going over. But executive actions are not supposed to be able to overrule either legislation or a court decision.
Right, like you're not going to find a state court that's going to say, yeah, the federal government has power to do this over my state. Like that's not going to be the conclusion they come to. But if that case then went up to the Supreme Court, we could get a very different conversation.
Yeah. I mean, we have a compromise Supreme Court, which isn't to say every case is going to go down. So, for example, birthright citizenship, I think only 2 people would support the executive action on. It's hard for me to say justices in this situation. What should be state law and should be your protections, and at this point still are. That's not to say they're not going to come under attack through funding, and then those cases would end up going up through the courts to see how they happen.
Thank you.
Hi. I was wondering any recommendations you might have for people that still want to change their name or gender markers, if that's going to change. If we're going to be able to do it in New York, but maybe not like on the passport or Social Security.
So name changes are a totally state thing, and you will go through the state court system to get a name change order, and then you use that order to change the various documents. The gender marker stuff in New York is all self-attestation, so you just check off the proper box on the form. New York has X gender markers on their documents, birth certificates, and driver's licenses, IDs. The Social Security and passport are the 2 that are sticky, obviously. They're not doing gender marker changes right now on either. X's are no longer available on passports at the moment, but there's litigation. And they are reverting. If you had changed your name and gender marker earlier or changed your gender marker earlier and you renew, they're reverting it to the original gender marker. The name change piece is less iffy. because a name change, everyone gets name changes, and you have to have a document that matches the court order. It orders you to whatever. So I think I can't give legal advice, but I personally have not updated my passport yet, and I would say, like, for me, I got an enhanced ID because I can get to Canada in case of emergency, and it's accurate. And my passport still says female, has my old name. State stuff should not be an issue, and if it is, it should be reported to the state. The federal stuff, stick to name changes, and I would say for the moment, don't mess with a gender marker change because they're keeping documents, they're shredding documents, they're keeping money, which they do anyway, but yeah. So you should be able to do it.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have two questions. So my first question is, do you feel as though the rollback on DEI acts within companies strengthen the already present discrimination on immigrants and LGBTQ plus persons? And then my second question is, what do you believe is the best way to educate people on a massive scale about their state representatives and governmental officials? Because I know, speaking with some of my peers, I know it's something that people are interested in, but they don't really know how to go about the process properly.
Well, I can I can help with the second question. So can we do the second question again?
I was saying, what do you feel is the best way to educate people on a massive scale about their state representatives and governmental officials?
Okay, first thing that you can do is you can Google New York State Senate, New York State Assembly. That's the first thing. When you do that, if you look for, there's up at the top, there's a bunch of different things you can hit. One of the things you hit is legislators, all right? And there's a spot where you can put in your address, and they will give you your representative. Oh, you're covered by State Senator Sam Jones, or your assembly member is Mary Smith, whatever it happens to be. It also, when you have that legislator's name, when you click on they have their own page. Their own page tells you their location in Albany and their location in the district office. So if you are in your district, living where you vote and all that good stuff, that district office should be local to you. You should be able to get there. And so, again, I always tell people the thing to do is to go to the office and make an appointment for another day to see the representative, and you're probably not going to see the representative. You're going to get a staff member. And that's okay. Don't worry about it. That's okay.
Make friends with staffers.
Exactly. Because some of those staffers know more about the issue that you want to talk about than the representative does. And usually the representative goes to the staffer and goes, well, what do you think about this bill? What do you think we should do? And the staffer will go, well, Charlie was just in our office, and Charlie brought up 3 good points, so that's why I think, Senator, you should vote for it. That type of thing. So I always say emails are okay. Written letters are better. Phone calls, up there. But visits are killer. They work really well. And the reason why I like to go to a district office first to make the appointment is because I found when I had a legislator that knew my name, and I would call, I'd like to make up an appointment, someone will get back to you. 2 weeks later, no one got back to me. I would call again. 2 weeks later, no one got back to me. So I was dumb enough to think, well, you know what? Phone calls aren't working. Let me go there. So I walk in the door, and right away someone there, can I help you? Yes, you can. I've been trying to make an appointment for a month now, and I'd like to see someone. Oh, my God. Okay, right away. Give me your name. Well, someone will get right back to you. And they literally did. The good thing about it is that I already know now where the office is. I know where to park. I know Susie behind the desk now because Susie was the one that got all upset and made sure that they made set up the appointment for me. So when I walk in the second time, it's, hi, Susie, how are you? Good to see you. Yeah, I'm waiting for John, the staffer John, to come. He has a meeting with me at 10 o'clock. It's a lot smoother that way. So I like going there. And I have found that is the best way to get people's attention. I've tried emails, I've tried phone calls, and you know what? They just kind of push around the cattle. But when you're in front of them, They have a real hard time with it. And so sometime this session, I will be going up to Albany. And the legislative building, if you've never been there, has 9 floors. I take the elevator to the 9th floor. I have a listing of who I want to see and what room they're in. And I do all the offices on the 9th floor. Then I take the stairs, because the elevator's always jammed. I take the stairs down, and I do all of the 8th floor. And then I take the stairs down and do the 7th floor, on and on and on. And I find, when I go there on Monday, no one's here to see you today. That's fine, no problem. I'm here till Wednesday. Can you work me in? Oh, I could get you in at 9 o'clock on Wednesday. Great, I'll be there. And so I start filling my calendar in as I hit office by office by office. It's a lot easier because I'm seeing people. And so I'm not waiting for emails to get back, and maybe someone will text me, and maybe someone will call me. It's usually done almost right on the spot, and I find that that's the best way to link up. But the first step is to know who your representative is. So whether you're talking about federal, whether you're talking about your federal level senator and your congressperson and so forth, you can go to those websites and find that out as well too. But use it. I mean, use the internet. It's really helpful to at least get the starting information going. And then once you get that, feel free to call, write, visit. Make yourself seen, make yourself known. Because a lot of the legislators, if they get, for example, if there's a specific issue, and they, let's say, we all send them a letter, and against whatever we're trying, 10 people send. So now he's got 50 letters that say, pass this law, and 10 letters that say, no, don't pass it. Which one do you think he's going to go with? The 50. So that's why it's important to know who you're talking to start getting a connection, and start having them know who you are, that you're going to speak out for your rights and for your community. How about that?
If you're trying to get other people involved, kind of assess where they are. So if it's someone who's very timid, they're not going to go up to Albany and visit.
Or make a phone call.
Maybe they will send an email.
Yep.
And if you get them on one of these apps, and there's tons of them, but like the 5 Calls app, it tells you the phone number. It gives you, if you say what issue you want to call on, it'll give you an example script so that it's very easy. If someone wants to call and say this, but they get really nervous, that they can do it. And then if there's someone who has been doing that a while and is willing to take the next step, the district office, like Juli is saying. And then if they've done that, and up to Albany, but bring people in at every level. If somebody is afraid to make a phone call, you're not going to get them up to Albany, but you might get them to send an email. And they literally do on issues. They just keep a tally. Like they have on phone calls, it's like for and against, check, 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 and they know exactly how many people called. So making your voice heard, even if it's just leaving a message on the answering machine or a voicemail of a legislature or something, that does make a difference.
Let me just say one very quick story, if I may. Congressman Swazi came out in late December, early January, started speaking out against trans athletes, and did the old biological men and biological boys playing women's sports. The next day, and I didn't even know where his district office was, so I looked it up. Next day, I went directly to the office. I was able to speak to a staffer directly that day. And that evening, I got a phone call from Tom Swazi. And I got an agreement from him to bring both his Washington, D.C. staff and his Long Island staff to a virtual training. I gave him a 90-minute training on the transgender community, basically what we call a Gender 101. It wouldn't have happened if I didn't go to that office. I'm sorry.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Sorry.
Oh, the DEI question.
Yeah.
I think that, again, it's demonstrating for us who was actually on our side to begin with, and we need to take our money and our participation places that will be supportive, and I think that there's right now
the preemptive compliance.
Yeah,
the places that are right now, the executive order did not stop a lot of DEI stuff in companies and schools and things like that. but many places are acting like they've been ordered not to do this.
Right,
and
who's
so-
caving before
so,
they have
yeah,
to?
they're caving before they need to. It's preemptive compliance, and there may not even become a time when they would have had to
Yeah.
cave.
Especially because now everything's in litigation, so they've now ditched all these programs, they've erased things from websites and from resources and all that, and they're deleting data. Like, they're doing things that are very difficult and expensive to undo. And I think that there will be a lot of regret, frankly, because...
Essentially, right now, what the executive orders say are that for places receiving federal funding, you should not consider DEI in hiring, in promotions, if you're a school and admitting students. But it doesn't say you can't have affinity groups, for example. And there, other than the general hostility towards DEI considerations, there's nothing to say that that will come. And yet, we see a lot of companies, some schools already stopping their affinity programs for that reason.
But I think that that's going to result in people finding their own spaces and leaving organizations that do things like that, because why would you, don't spend...
And be proactive about it. You can go online and see what are the stores and the companies that immediately abandon DEI. And what are the companies...
And it's ones that march in Pride every year.
Yep. What are the companies who said, nope, we're not going to do that? And so, I've always liked Costco. Now I love Costco, and I'm there shopping. I was kind of dismayed to see a report about Target, and I also saw a report saying that their earnings dropped significantly in the weeks after. So I do think it's really important to inform yourself and choose where you spend your money, but also just because somebody posts a list on social media doesn't mean those are the right companies. So make sure you're going to a reliable source to get your information.
Thank you.
I do think that it's starting a conversation with people who you can say it's okay. I think people who wouldn't have been having this conversation or wouldn't have been privy to it are now part of it, and they're learning, which is important.
We have 10 more minutes, so we'll do this like a speed round. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Aiden Smith, and I wanted to ask, what are things that are seen as LGBTQ plus issues, but they also greatly affect non-LGBTQ plus people, in an effort to bring in those that are on the outskirts, but are still like, well, it doesn't really affect me, so what should I be doing? What are those issues that have that intersection?
I think that everything is an LGBTQ issue because LGBTQ people are everywhere. Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of LGBTQ people, and I have this conversation in the courts a lot because we have the LGBTQ Commission, and then everything is always siloed. So it's like there's the immigration stuff, there's the, family law, whatever, all the different kinds of law, and then LGBTQ people are just placed on top of that because we're in all of those categories. So it's kind of an issue where you're like, if we just address this from the get-go and framed ourselves in this way, we could avoid all the trickle-down garbage in the first place. Because, there are issues that come up with custody where there's a trans kid or a trans parent. There are document change issues. There are immigration issues. It's an asylum. Right now, everything that's going on, trans asylum seekers are screwed. It's in every facet, in schools, in places of employment. Because we're everywhere, it makes sense to just start from that place.
I was going to say bodily autonomy. Because you're talking about, obviously reproductive rights, but you're also talking about gender-affirming care. Mm-hmm. Do we want our government deciding what you can do to your body? I got a problem with that.
Well, also, there used to be laws about that women had to be wearing 3 pieces of feminine clothing. Mm-hmm. You can't do that anymore. It's not going to work. I don't know. That was not related to the question. But.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. I know immigration was briefly mentioned throughout the discussion. So immigration is a very hot topic right now. My question was, what do you see potentially happening to immigrants in the LGBTQ plus community?
So there's a few things. So the first, I am very concerned that the Supreme Court could strike down marriage equality, which would be devastating for everyone, but in particularly for a binational couple, that means that they may be permanently separated, because if a U.S. citizen is married to a same-sex partner, but that marriage is not recognized as valid, there's no way to bring that person to the United States to give that person status. And that was the state of our immigration laws up until Windsor, and because we had a Democratic president and Eric Holder was Attorney General, as soon as Windsor came down, Eric Holder said, that means we're getting rid of discrimination in immigration. And that's how it's been since then. It is, the idea that a family would be kept apart forever is both ridiculous and devastating. Additionally, there is a big chunk of asylum seekers, so people fleeing to the United States to escape torture, violence, or death, are LGBTQ plus people. In fact, our asylum system has been stronger than our regular system in many ways. So even if you, when you went back to where our immigration system was openly homophobic, like homophobic slurs to people within who might be in a same-sex marriage, the asylum system was granting those cases, recognizing that people were in danger. When people with HIV were barred from entering the United States, the asylum system was granting asylum to people with HIV who were in danger because of that. It is very concerning to me now that, say, one transgender asylum seeker who has been attacked and nearly killed because of her gender identity may now again be returned to a male detention facility surrounded by people maybe who come from the same country she came from, who are not accepting of transgender people. When it's within my career that was the situation, and many of my clients were sexually assaulted and physically assaulted while in detention.
Does that do anything for their claim?
No, because the claim is about danger in the home country, not, I mean, you potentially might get a U visa, crime victim visa, or something like that from that. But
even if the crime happened here?
Yes. Actually, the U visa is specific for crimes that happen here. So actually, a lot of times our LGBTQ plus clients may come in based on hate crimes here in the U.S. Wow. But anyway, in general, our asylum system, even in the most hostile immigration courts, at least in my experience, have appropriately analyzed LGBTQ plus cases and granted asylum where it's clear that the person is in serious danger. Right now, when at the start of the administration, they fired a whole lot of judges at the top, not because they were Democrat or Republican, but just to send the message, we're going to fire you if you don't do what we want. Weekend before last, they fired about 20, actually between 20 and 30 immigration judges.
The backlog in immigration court right now is profound.
Profound. They also they also fired half of the appellate board for immigration cases. And so one of the things that we're all very worried about is how does that trickle down? And again, this preemptive compliance, if you think they're going to deny cases, if they think that they will get promoted and avoid being fired, if they don't grant cases, then that may be what happens.
Thank you.
I think we have to wrap up. I know there was a person who was going to ask a question, and I invite them to ask you after you come down from
Absolutely.
the dais. Please join me in thanking our guests here who shared a lot with us today. I'd like to correct
Thank you for asking questions.
Yeah.
It makes it a much more interesting conversation for us, and then we're actually addressing what you're thinking about.
Yes.
And if I can correct one thing, there is an election here in Nassau County. Bruce Blakeman, the county executive, is up for re-election, and he is an advocate. He advocates against transgender folks, prohibiting use of county facilities for transgender inclusive sports. If that's accurate.
And also has decided to cooperate with the federal government
Right.
against immigrants. So
Yes.
carry on.
There you have it. So thank you all for coming. Note, we have several other events today. The next one I want to come to, but I have to go teach, which is Storytelling as Resistance. It's a journalistic piece about Empire City, which is an award-winning podcast about the New York City Police and its development. So I hope you find time to come to that and other events today. Thanks again for being here. Thank you.
So welcome everyone. Hopefully you are here for Storytelling as Resistance. We have a little bit of a snafu because our guests are kind of stuck in traffic. I need to talk, sorry? Talk into the mic because we're video recording. Oh, okay, all right. Well then let us grab this.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Duahali Sai-Kao-Tao, or Professor X. I'm over at the Herbert School, and I also am the professional in residence at WRHU, the university radio station. Welcome, everyone. We have a lovely event for all of you with extraordinary speakers. However, we have a small snafu. We've got a couple of folks who are as you know, coming from Brooklyn, and sometimes traffic can be a little bit of a headache. And so our guests are arriving shortly, but in the meantime, we are going to play the trailer of Empire City. As you all know from the promotion on the flyer and all the different things that you've gotten in your emails, we have an extraordinary Peabody Award-winning journalist and lots of extraordinary folks who are going to come and talk to you about this particular podcast, which, of course, is an award-winning podcast. So let's just make sure that the audio works, and we want to just play the beginning of this trailer for you, okay? And then hopefully our guest will arrive shortly.
Dirt and a lot of things.
I'm playing in a Central Park sandbox with my 4-year-old daughter.
Sneak under here.
Yeah. When I see a police officer approaching the edge of the playground, and my body instinctively stiffens. Something comes over me, and I start wondering. Enyola, miss?
Oh, stand by. What happened there?
Safe.
I mean, that is what the police say their job is. She's just repeating what she's heard.
Copy that.
But when I hear her say it, I start to panic. It's the cover story, and it's hiding something.
The first person to use the term organized crime, he didn't mean it in the sense of Don Corleone and the mafia. He meant it in terms of the police department.
From Wondery and Crooked Media with Push Black, I'm Chinjirai Kumanika, and this is Empire City, the untold origin story of the NYPD. At a time when we're debating where policing is going, we're going to tell you where the police came from.
They wanted me to write about the New York City Police Department, but without using the words violence or corruption, which is effectively impossible.
A story of how the largest and most influential police department in the country became one of the most violent and corrupt organizations in the world.
Doesn't matter if you're, a self-emancipated Black person or if you're free or what, they're just sending people back to the South, kidnapping them.
It's the story of what the badge was really created to protect and who it really serves.
The police are not the system itself. They are the muscle of the system, right?
When officers with the power to fight the danger become the danger.
I was terrified. I'm not going to talk to the police because they're the ones who are perpetrating this. Who am I going to talk to?
How New Yorkers have to forge their own visions of safety and go to war with the police.
Let your motto be resistance, resistance, resistance. He's basically calling for a slave rebellion.
Armed slave rebellion?
He doesn't say that, but, what kind of rebellion would it be without them?
Follow Empire City on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Empire City early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, actually, if we could take the screen up, that'd be great. And then, Professor Alan Singer, would you please join us on stage here? And then, as soon as we pull up the screen, we will begin to... Oh, sure.
Hi, everybody. I actually had a very minor role in the podcast, but I asked...
Professor Singer is very humble about this. Before we begin, let's turn the lights back on. Okay, wonderful. So, all of you heard just a very brief tease, a very short trailer that gives you a hint as to what this podcast is all about. As all of you know, podcast making, storytelling, is not an easy endeavor. That endeavor usually takes teams of people, fact-checking, researching, making sure that all the details, not just the voices, but the audio, is compelling enough to be able to convince all of you to listen and to stay tuned. So that was just a very, very small hint as to what that podcast and what you're about to hear is all about. And I've listened to the entire podcast. Don't take it from me, but take it from The New Yorker and so many others that have said that this podcast is one of the best of 2024. So I highly suggest all of you take a listen to that. But before I introduce Professor Alan Singer, I was listening to the podcast and then suddenly they said, in Hofstra University Professor Alan Singer. And I thought, what? Fantastic. We have our own Professor Alan Singer who's in this podcast, which is terrific. And Professor Singer, before our guest arrives, since as all of you know, they're slightly delayed, but they will be here shortly. Professor Singer, tell us, you say that you had a very minor role in this, but in fact, you are a historian. You put this in perspective. When did the NYPD, and of course, as you all know, this is the origin story of the NYPD. I am in love with origin stories. Origin stories are the root of everything. Every single one of you have an origin story. It's powerful, it's passionate, it's beautiful, and we can't wait to hear all of your stories. But you, Professor Singer, have an origin story. You understand the history of the NYPD. When did they first get incorporated?
Well, I think the question is, when did they first become professional? And the answer is, I'm not sure they ever did. In 1967, I was a college student at CCNY, and this was the war in Vietnam. And we were having a protest demonstration on Whitehall Street, which was the draft center. And there were about 5,000 college students and about 2,000 special force police officers mounted, and they all were like football linebackers. And we're standing there in the park when they had a cavalry charge into us, swinging their batons. Now, it was a serious mistake on their part because we ran. Well, when we ran from them, because it was terrifying, I don't think anybody ever stood up to a cavalry charge. We actually blocked traffic in New York City for the entire day as we were running and they were chasing us. I finally got caught and I was arrested for obstructing pedestrian traffic, which meant I was standing on the sidewalk at the time. I was actually 17 years old. So I'm standing on the sidewalk, I get arrested for obstructing pedestrian traffic. I get thrown into a police car where they proceeded to beat us with nightsticks. In 2021, during the Black Lives Matter demonstration, I saw the exact same thing, and the New York Times actually filmed it all. So the question, when did they become a professional police department, is really a serious question to explore. It was established as a paid professional police force in 1828, and they were called the municipal police. Before 1828, there was just an assortment of law enforcement. There were night watchmen, there were city marshals, there were constables, and there were municipal police officers. And they were fighting back and forth. Even once it was established, it was so chaotic that in 1857, the state passed a new law creating a new police force, the Metropolitan Police. But the people in the municipal police were not happy, and in 1857, there was actually a riot and a fight between the two police forces in front of New York City Hall. So we're looking at a really chaotic situation. But actually, the situation was worse, because not only were they fighting amongst themselves, but as New York City rapidly grew in the first half of the 19th century, it was a major stop on the Underground Railroad. What you have, the way basically the Underground Railroad is working on the East Coast, is Harriet Tubman and others are bringing people to Philadelphia, where William Still is the head of the Underground Railroad there. And then what happens is people gradually make it to Brooklyn, New York City. And from New York City is crucial because there you can go north on the Hudson River to Troy and Albany, and then you can either continue north Lake Champlain up to Canada, you can make a left turn and follow the Erie Canal, or else people like Frederick Douglass, they caught a boat on Long Island Sound and they ended up in Massachusetts. This is where people came, waiting to see which was the safest route to escape to freedom. Well, the slave catchers knew that, so they would congregate in New York on the docks, and the abolitionists would congregate on the docks, trying to capture or free people who were freedom seekers. Well, amongst the police, they had what was called the Kidnappers Club. And what the police would do is they would try to seize people quickly. Now, this actually impacts on our understanding of what's happening with ICE today. What happened under the fugitive slave laws, which became more and more restrictive, the person who was seized had to prove they were free. The police didn't have to prove they were a slave, runaway, but they themselves had to prove they were free. Well, which was not really always possible. So what ended up happening is the police forces would seize the people, take them to a criminal court, and the judges who were in on it, they would just send them south to slavery. So what you had is the police in this Kidnappers Club, and with the complicity of the legal system, they're making money on the bounties of the fugitive slaves. And a number of them were not fugitives. They were just black people walking while black.
Professor Singer, I'm of course fascinated about what you're saying, but let me also just jump in here really quick. For those of you just joining us, as you all know and have heard, we have guests arriving shortly, and our organizer is here. So soon we'll pick up where we left off. But before we get into the inside works of the history of the police and all that, I want to just touch on the podcast, the making of it itself. When you were first introduced or asked to be part of this, what did you think about the idea of creating an origin story about the NYPD?
Well, as you heard in the introduction when we talked about resistance, I was not always a fan of the NYPD, though I do, as basically as an old white guy, I do appreciate being in safe areas. I just thought it would be exciting. I had done research. Hi. I think I'm going to be replaced. They found me because I had been written about slavery in New York, and I had been doing research on this. So it's exciting to take what you study and bring it to a broader audience. And that's why I decided I'd like to participate. But I'm going to let you guys go anyway.
Yes, Professor Singer, thank you so much. We did, yes. We showed the trailer. And as our guests are arriving and kind of setting up, I know that many of you have crossed paths with police here and there. And there are conflicting and often very different emotions about the NYPD. But not just the NYPD, police forces all over the country. So this particular podcast helps us understand better the history of local and New York NYPD. Hopefully, all of you will have had a taste of that. But again, as our guests, bring themselves onto the stage, I just want to kind of put out there, the idea and what brought you all here to this idea of the NYPD and the history of that. Is anyone willing to share their history? Any brave soul? All right, since you all are shy, I'll let you pass on this one. But okay, Professor Diane Hodson, take it away. Thank you so much.
Sorry, y'all. There was a really bad crash on the belt, and we all got stuck in it. But thankfully, we weren't hurt. But yes, I'm delighted to be here with you all. I'm so glad you are joining us today for our event, Storytelling as Resistance. As Dwali just said, my name is Diane Hodson, and I'm an assistant professor here in radio, television, and film, as well as the coordinator of the podcasting and audio storytelling program. And it is that audio storytelling that brings us here today to take a look at the podcast Empire City that Alan so kindly was talking about, and to speak to its creator, Chandrai Kumnika, who's also my collaborator, as well as a little more from Alan and Asad Dandia, who will be joining us. And we're gonna dig in. Many think of podcasts as chat shows, like two people talking. Maybe you've seen it on YouTube. You see like a peek into someone's bedroom, very informal. That is not what Empire City is. It is a narrative podcast, which means it was a storytelling podcast. Kind of think of a docu-series you might see on television, something you binged, a rich, developed narrative, strong characters, deeply reported, and told over a series of episodes. And Empire City is no different. It was just made for audio. It was a Tribeca Film Festival audio selection and has been named one of the best podcasts of 2024 by the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and Time Magazine. So it's gotten a lot of acclaim this past year. And so I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Chandrai Kumnika, who is a journalism professor at NYU, a Peabody winner for his work on the show on Civil. He specializes in historically focused narrative nonfiction audio journalism and using that as a way to critique the ideology of American myths about issues such as race, the Civil War, and policing. So I hope you will join me in welcoming Chandrai to our campus.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? All right. all right, I come from hip hop, so I can project nice and loud if I need to. Yo, I'm so thrilled to be here today. First of all, these are really interesting times we're living through right now, and confusing, I think. And I think it's important to have a moment to gather and be able to talk. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I'm working through my Instagram addiction every day, fighting losing mostly. But that's kind of like getting information and analysis through the fire hose. And I think it's nice for us to sit here and have a moment to reflect a little bit. And I think that is also part of the kind of podcasting that we specialize does. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who put this program together. These programs don't come together with no effort. It takes time, so shout out to everyone at Hofstra. I don't know all the names yet, but I will meet you. Of course, I have my colleagues here, and I'm definitely going to brag on them in a minute. But I also want to talk about you. One of the reasons why I agreed to do this talk is because when Diane mentioned that there were going to be different folks from Hofstra, and she mentioned what some of you all do. She said there's some people who are really focused on radio. There are some people who are focused on looking at issues of power, social inequality. There are some people that are really interested in sports, and of course, y'all have tremendous tradition here of sports communication. I've taught. I used to teach at Clemson University. I've taught at Penn State. I know about sports schools. You know what I'm saying? But y'all have a really powerful tradition, and all of those things mean that you all are going to be doing big things. And I know I'm in the room with people who are going to be shaping this conversation. In the end of the day, I'm getting a little older. I be seeing this salt and pepper kicking in my beard. My time ain't up. I still got a couple punches to throw, you know what I mean? But really, it's y'all. And so I'm honored to be here and have this conversation with you. And I think literally all the things that you all are studying, I've been in this game for a minute, is relevant. So I'm really eager to get into it.
All right. Well, thank you, Chandra. Before we jump into Empire City, I know we got the trailer. We talked a little bit with Alan. I want to take a step back and first just talk about storytelling, because that's what brings us here today. And just tell us a little bit about in what ways storytelling plays kind of a central role in your life.
Well, I will say that storytelling really has come to define so much of what I do. But I first was introduced to storytelling as a hip-hop artist, as I mentioned earlier. I was a hip-hop artist. Like every black male between the ages of 0 and 50, I was once a hip hop artist. Just joking. And so that was the first time, you know what I'm saying? When I was like, really even in like 5th grade, like listening to the radio, hearing, people share stories, right? Like artists like Slick Rick, Rakim, sitting there. Like just picture me, right, in like 6th grade, and I'm listening to the radio and somebody saying, I start to think, and then I sink into the paper like I was ink. You know what I mean? These are boomer bars, I know. But the point is like that was what I was listening to. People, a guy talking about writing on the radio who was like the coolest dude out. And I listened to the stories hip-hop artists told. And also, as we'll learn, I have family in the civil rights movement. We're on Civil Rights Day today. Storytelling plays a huge role in how essentially all of us got to be in this room. Like I look across the room at everybody here, and I will say, when I look at this room, unfortunately, the American plan was not for any of us to be in this room. You know what I mean? Maybe there's like a billionaire white male, property-owning male in the room now, but if you're not that, like even if you're a poor white, like you weren't part of the plan either. So I'm not coming at the white people. Like all of our ancestors in different ways struggled to get to this point, and that's the civil rights story of America, right? So. And storytelling was part of that. What were the stories that people understood? How did they understand what was going on? How did they communicate that to a lot of different people? How did those stories play into different rights, right? The civil rights battle is forged not just about voting, but also on the playing field, right? Look at the Negro, look at the leagues, right? That's a major place where it's playing out. So in all those places, storytelling is relevant. And for me, when I started to get into podcasting, I just felt like it was a great way to communicate ideas. And it also, telling a story plunges you into the research of having to figure out what the story is. It's a place where you challenge your assumptions. And you have to say, oh man, here's what I thought the story was, but wow, as I get deeper into it, it's not quite that. So all those things have made storytelling central for my work.
I mean, you talk about being a hip hop artist, and you've had a background in a lot of ways, but you're also an academic. Like, you could just write books about this. You could just write like a really boring book about the police. You chose instead to make a podcast. Why audio? What's so important or enticing about this form of storytelling?
Well, you know, some scholars like Alan and other folks, I see my homie Veronica, somebody I know from back in the day, many of the scholars are actually, they can write in really compelling ways. When I write, my writing voice as a writer, particularly my scholarly voice, is not that compelling. I hate to say it. I mean, I think I'm saying something of value, but I could just imagine y'all falling asleep reading my work on that way. But I think that sound, again, I'm a hip hop artist, right? So I was immersed with sound. Sound is a powerful medium, right? I mean, you know, people have said, you know, the child hears things before it can really see and make sense of its own mother's voice, right, of its parent's voice. And, you know, it's very intimate, right? It comes into your ears. I mean, shoot, when I first started, when I moved to New York, I was like, oh, wow, nobody's paying attention to it. Everybody's in their own little worlds being talked to with their headphones. So sound is very intimate and profound. And also, another thing about sound that I really liked was that, you know, it forces you to write in a way that makes people focus, right? I mean, I want to tread carefully and not diss academics, my colleagues, because I'm a consumer of the most nerdy kind of academic work, because I also like to be smarter than other people. I just, you know what I'm saying, to know more, to try. So I read the most nerdy stuff, legal, you know, what all kind of stuff. But scholars have permission to write poorly, right? We use big, dense phrases, and journals reward that, actually. Radio does not. Radio, you got to learn how to cut through and get the message across. And so, and I think that, and then also, you know, the nice thing about, I would say, radio over television is you can listen to it anywhere, right? Like I used to listen to, I got into NPR driving, chopping vegetables, you know what I mean? Keeping me company. And it's all those different places. So I just think it's a really powerful medium. And I think that as you see it, we're still in the very beginning of podcasting exploding. And by the way, I'm sorry, I just don't want to get too far into it. Y'all heard the sort of little accolades that Diane said about my career, and I've achieved some, you know, some award nominations and some downloads and all that. From that position, I rarely reference that, but from that position, as Dr. Chinjerai, I'm telling you, this person, Diane Hodson, is like maybe the illest person in the game in podcasting. Like definitely in the top 3. That's my official professional position. And you can see it. If you look, I mean, I just want you to know, because I think my students, it's funny, like I go to talks, I fly all around the world giving these talks. My students think I'm like a piece of furniture in the office. They don't care, you know what I mean? So I just want y'all to know, like this person is very high in demand in our industry. And if you see, like every top 10 chart we were on, I just go down the chart and I know, like on this, just think about this. In the same year, this 3 million podcasts in the Apple thing, every top 10 chart, she got 2 podcasts on it. That's crazy. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. Go ahead. What was the question?
You know. All right, well, we did that okay. I don't know if I'm so good at plugging a cord in. So let's see if we can hear a little bit of this, what we're talking about. I don't know if we can. Let's see. No. Let's see. I'm trying to play. Hold on. Sorry, guys. See, I can do one thing, but I can't do this. This is what happens when you are late. Okay, let's see. Output. It says it's going through the port. I know there's some technical love in the room, but I don't know who those people are right now. Technical people. All right. Well, we want to.
Yeah. Well, let's try to work that out.
All right. We want to hear some stuff, and we wanted to play some stuff from the show, which was what this little fun thing is for. But
Dan, do you want to send it to me? I can play it.
Sure. But for now, we're going to just kind of skip ahead, and we'll listen in a little bit. So taking what Chandra is talking about, all this idea about storytelling, we want to kind of now dive into Empire City more specifically. As you heard, this show is a deep dive into the history of the NYPD. So Chandra, tell us a little bit about how we got there, how you came up with this idea.
Well, I think there were 3 things, and I'll try to be really brief. The first is that, I mean, I'm happy to talk about, should I talk about my father?
Yeah.
Well, my father was a civil rights activist. He was crucial, on Civil Rights Day. Shout out to my father, Makaza Kumanika, who was formerly known as Herbert Calendar. He worked with an organization called Congress of Racial Equality. And I was going through some archival footage of, that there's an archive of footage of, core demonstrations. And all of a sudden, I saw my father. And the reason why this was powerful is that I never saw a moving image of my father and thought I never would, right? Like, my father died in 1993. And so he, I have pictures of him, but I never, the moving images. Now in the age of phones and Instagram, everybody got like moving images even of your folks who passed away. You could just kind of be with them in that way. And I was unable to, and I was like, that's just what it is. And then suddenly in this archive footage, I see my father clear as day. He's moving, and he looks like me. He's a little fitter than me because he's younger than I knew him. And I'm like, damn, that's my dad. And I felt emotional. But what was also hitting me was that this was NYPD surveillance footage. It was NYPD shot. It was footage shot by the NYPD, and it was a counterintelligence unit. My father was demonstrating against an incident of police brutality, and this counterintelligence unit, their whole purpose was to shut down civil rights protest. It wasn't about so this wasn't like a rogue cop who applied a chokehold. This wasn't about someone didn't know if someone had a firearm. This was called the Bossa Unit. You should look it up. And it was funded by taxpayers, created to stop people who were fighting for voting rights, to desegregate schools, to rent, strike. Like, they were literally around the city as a unit of the NYPD, a whole institution that was dedicated to sort of provoke. And that made me say, it made me raise questions about how we talk about the police, what the function of the police is. Because so often we're talking about an error that people have different takes on. But I'm like, it wasn't a rogue cop. This was a whole institution. So that was one component. The other thing is that I have a 5-year-old daughter, so I now live in New York. And I realized at a certain point, is already forming her opinions about the police. She has questions. She sees them constantly. And, they're in her school. And the story that she's getting in her school is not the whole story, right? I mean, when she asked me about the police, I'm very deliberate not to tell her listen, it won't take you too long to realize I'm not that fond of police. I'm just going to be transparent. So you have the information you need to know to assess my bias. But I don't want to give my daughter that bias, right? I want her to have a chance to form her own thing. And also, just practically, I don't want my daughter to be terrified. There's 36,000 cops. Even if I wanted to tell her that, I'm just like, well, I try to answer in really precise ways. I'm like, well, the police are here. Like, she's like, are they here to help me? Or are they here to put me in jail? I'm like, well, some of them are here to help you. I try to be honest with her and give her a real straight answer. So, and I realized the thing that my daughter needs to know and what I want to know related to my father are actually what we all need to know. Because when I started this project and I started asking people, where were the first 3 police departments in this country formed and under what circumstances? Almost no one knew the answer to that. Some people were like, slave patrols. And it's like, well, as you'll see in this short, facts, as you'll see in the series, but that's 2 words. That's not a history. You know what I mean? And I was like, how can there be 18,000 police departments in this country, billions of dollars just in the NYPD, and no one even knows the real origins or history? Like, I'm talking about a lot of people couldn't answer this. Certainly most police couldn't. So that just feels like we need to know that to solve all of our problems, no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
All right. Dwali, do we have the clip?
Yes.
Awesome.
Make sure that we have that.
All right. Thinking about, well, that's getting teed up. You're talking about these stories and how this connects to you personally.
Right.
But this show is about 19th century New York City, which is a pretty removed from 1960s with your dad, pretty removed from 2025 with your daughter. So why go all the way back?
I mean, y'all know how talking about things like police are now. Everybody has an opinion, no matter what it is, right? And I come from this, again, I used to teach at Clemson University. I had a lot of students whose family was police, and I have family who are police. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so I said, how can I begin to understand this in a way that gets a little bit past the propaganda of it all, right? And I love history for that reason. Not to say that history is not often written with an agenda, but to say that I love what history does is I'm going to give you a set of facts that I can empirically verify. Like, here's a document from the Historical Society. Here's an account from a retired police officer. I'm going to give you all these different facts, and I'm going to put together this story. And if you don't like it, it ain't just my opinion. You got to have some facts to counteract my facts. Yeah. And if you don't, then my history has to stand. So history, is a way, and again, if you listen to, interestingly, like across different genres, like of media, even in sports media, we were just hanging with ESPN 30 for 30. ESPN 30 for 30, I mean, they do some of the most powerful storytelling of any genre around sports, but it's in the documentary tradition. It ain't just, cats just telling you what they think, which is fine, that's fine. But they really do real documentary storytelling, and a lot of it is historical, just telling you how we got here. How did this league start? How did this happen? Or here was a history of a particular battle. So I found history was a good way in, and we needed to know.
Dwali's going to play a clip right now of a conversation you had with your daughter, which I think gets to, I saw a little bit of this in the trailer, but I think it gets to how a lot of people kind of came up hearing about the police and how she sort of kind of took that in even from a very young age. So we'll see if yours works better.
That's my friend Sam. Say hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam. Hi,
How you doing?
On a warm Friday morning last spring, my daughter Eniola and I met my producer Sam at Central Park.
Yeah, to the park, right? Yeah.
Central Park is one of my daughter's favorite places to visit in New York City. When we're away from cars, surrounded by green grass, she can yell as loud as she wants and run as fast as she can. I can tell it makes her feel free. But part of why I like to come to Central Park is that this land Eniola's running on was once home to Seneca Village, an early 19th century free black settlement. At a time when it wasn't remotely possible to rely on the police for protection, black folks built a community on this land with schools, churches, and gardens that existed for 32 years.
What do you see over there?
A playground! A playground!
When my daughter and I come here to play, we feel connected to that. 200 years of black history in New York, the radical possibility of freedom and community, a possibility my father fought to protect.
Okay, what do you got? Are you making a sandcastle?
No, cake.
That's yummy.
As I sit playing in the sandbox with Eniola, I see a police officer approaching the edge of the playground, and my body instinctively stiffens. I look down, and she's still playing, completely carefree. Part of me wants to freeze her in this moment. But then, something comes over me. The police are already a part of her world. I've seen them in the cartoons she watches and her toys. And there are even cops at her school. And I start wondering, what is she actually picking up from all that?
Eniola, let me ask you a question. What do you think the police do?
She puts down her sand shovel and her eyes dart back and forth, searching for the right answer.
They keep people safe.
I mean, that is what the police say their job is. But when I hear her say it, I start to panic.
They keep people safe.
As her father, part of me wishes I could just leave the truth hidden and protect her innocence. I wish I could tell her that Tobias Budno and the kidnapping club were just bad apples, and that after they faded out, New York's police grew into something that we all could rely on to protect us. But that's not what happened.
All right, so that's a little like a longer interaction between you and your daughter. And one of the reasons I wanted to play that is because at the very beginning of this process, we talked about how people have feelings about the police. Whatever those feelings are that you might have in this room, you have some kind of feeling. And it may be having come up believing that like the police, like Eniola at this moment, that they're here to keep you safe, that they're here to protect and serve, that they are here to do the opposite, that they are going to come and show up and look at you like the enemy based on the color of your skin. But there's a lot of people that have feelings, but not a lot of knowledge. And that was something I think we kind of ran into in this entire process, was that people, it was so strong and so deep how people felt. And yet it really pushed against, like, but that's not exactly how, like, the history worked. Like, what you believe is not lined up with the history. So how did that kind of play out when you were kind of digging into this assumptions that many have that were challenged, or your own that were challenged in this process of what you came in believing?
Yeah, no, it's a real question. I mean, I think, included in that group of people who had very strong feelings but not enough information. One thing was that, I mean, so I think that what happened is constantly throughout this show, I was my own assumptions about the police were challenged. One big thing I would say is that because at that point I had done a lot of journalism and research on things to do with what might be called the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, I was in Ferguson. Some of you all are old enough to remember Mike Brown and that incident. I was at his funeral. I was out there. I saw many of the things that happened with my own eyes, watched police tear gas, literally, and then it was actual tear gas. Peaceful protesters would hit them with rubber bullets. I was just talking to Sharice, who I forget her last name, but she's a reporter in L.A. who got hit with a rubber bullet by police. She's a journalist who studies sheriffs. So I had feelings about that, but one thing that this series taught me to do was to understand the way that the police are shaped by other forces, right? So that person in uniform is one component, and they have some discretion and some beliefs, but there's a larger structure and system around them. And often, it's not a system that's even working to their benefit. We can talk about that more. And that way, police sometimes are like athletes, right? Where people love to have you on the front line, taking the concussions and taking the hits. But some of the most damning information we learned about the NYPD came from police themselves, talking about what it was meant to do their job and how they got used and how they got, treated. So that was one thing. Also, this idea that the police were kind of always there, and they were there, that they were designed, first of all, to keep people safe, like most of us safe, is just factually not the case, right? It's not a matter that when police do that, they're making a choice against what the job does. It's like the job itself was not crafted or designed to keep the people in this room safe. It might be designed to protect some people's interests. And so watching how many evolutions, and there were some small things. I didn't realize police hated uniforms. They did not want, they protested against uniforms. And just seeing how many different things, how many changes the police had to go through to get to where they were. None of this was like assumed, and none of it was natural. New Yorkers did not want police. You got to remember, when police started, you're about 100. You're like 100 years out. You're less than 100 years out from the Revolutionary War. So there were people. Think about it, if you lived through the Revolutionary War, you had ancestors, or you yourself might have known what it was like to live in New York when it was occupied by British. People were locked up. So someone was like, hey, you know what we want to do? We want to put uniformed dudes with guns who have the power to lock you up. Is that a good idea? No. They didn't even want it. So all those things challenge my own assumptions, like what I kind of thought the story was.
Yeah. I think the piece about the uniform is really surprising for folks, because that just feels like so entwined with who the police are. And it's part of one of our students who is going to be joining us later, produced an award-winning piece for the BEA that is also connected to this idea about the uniform. Can you tell us a little bit more about why they pushed against the uniform? Because I think that gets to kind of some of the tensions around like what people get wrong today.
You see what Diane's doing? This is the person you want on your team. She would do this all the time. She had a way of just pushing me, because one key thing that we got to learn, and one way that documentary is a little different than like just radio, and I love radio. I'm the biggest fan of radio. I listen to it every day. But one way documentary is different, the documentary tradition of radio, I should say, by the way, is that we do a lot of revision. You know what I mean? I think the first episode, I don't know how many drafts we did the first episode.
I don't think you want to think about it.
Yeah, it was like over 20 revisions. So when you see us on those lists, it's related to that. It's related to me listening to Diane. And I'm just saying that because I know y'all be writing assignments when, trust me, if Diane, it was what I'm going to say, 90% of the time if Diane asks you a question about your writing, she's right. That's what I learned. Everyone on our team learned that the hard way. She's usually right. Anyway, but yeah, so in this case, the uniforms that was interesting was they were kind of surveillance, right? I mean, first of all, one thing is you're dealing with all men who also, let's just say, maybe there's some who believe that we've defeated all the issues of patriarchy and misogyny today. Those are in the past, but they certainly, maybe we can all agree that like in the 19th century, there were some issues about how men looked at women. So one thing was just like, I'm a man, you don't dress me up. Another man is gonna dress me up. You know what I mean? They were kind of like on that note with it. And then the other thing was that it was surveillance, right? Like cops didn't have uniforms, so a lot of times cops were, there's accounts of all these cops in like a donut shop. It was actually a butter cake shop owned by a man named Buttercake Dick, just to give you a detail. That was his name. It was just in an account, it's a memoir, I can show you. So yeah, all these cops and Buttercake Dicks, but you don't know they're necessarily cops, right? Because they don't have uniforms on. But if they have uniforms, people are like, oh, so it was surveillance. So for those reasons, they were like, it's insulting. You're dressing me up. You're surveilling me.
But just to be clear, though, to be surveil them, not because they were surveilling the people of New York City, they would be held accountable for not doing their jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
If you could be seen with a uniform
you could recognize that a cop was the one slacking off or doing whatever, drinking. These cops would be drinking a lot of times on the beat. So those kinds of things they didn't like. Yeah.
And it brought us back to the thing about the Revolutionary War. It's like it looked like the military. It looked like an occupying force. And they did not want to be an occupying force, which if you think about the police today, it can somehow link to that idea. It feels a little full circle.
Depending on what neighborhood you're in, a lot of people don't, the neighborhoods, I grew up in Baltimore. The police didn't feel like, oh, our friendly police are here to protect us. It was like, they definitely felt like an occupation. And the uniforms, and that was the thing. So the police themselves didn't like it, and that's why they protested, but people also didn't like it. And the first police that appeared in New York in terms of modern police, because police have been in different forms for a long time, people really were like, no, these look like Brits. And they pushed back.
Along the lines of thinking about that, I'm thinking about the fact that we all know police. At one point, you donned a uniform as a security guard. Like, there are family members that are police. How do you square what you're talking about, like in this critique of policing generally, with the fact that you know people and love people that have done this work?
That was a big motivation for this series, was that I think in this country, we have a way of thinking about power that tends to reduce everything down to the individual level. We don't like thinking about systems, right? And there are actually whole movements trying to tell you there's nothing structural going on. The problem with that, though, even if, let's just say you're someone who believes that, like there's no systemic rate, there's no any of this stuff, right?
Which means you'd buy into like bad apples. There's a couple bad apples.
There's a couple of bad apples, you know what I mean? But the problem is, let's just take, a police officer who shoots a person, unarmed person, because they, as we're told, they believe their life is in danger, right? If this all comes down to the individual, then it's like, that's just all these individuals making bad choices. And that actually serves the system of police quite well, because if they can just offload that onto individual people. But if there's a system, that person is, what's interesting is when you see these court cases, right, these people are like, yo, I was doing my job. I'm doing how I was trained. You know what I mean? They are trying to do what they believe to be the case. And so I think that for me, it's kind of like really trying to understand how is power actually working here, right? And what does that have to do with individual people, and how does that have to do with systems and how they're trained, and all those things was really important.
Because it's almost more damning toward the individual police officer if you don't think there's systemic issues, because then you're like, that specific officer is the problem.
Right, and it's not about getting rid of accountability, but it's about getting to the root of the problem. You know what I mean? I mean, if you have an institution that is killing thousands of people on a yearly basis, many of those people unarmed, then I think it's bigger than just individuals, right? There's some kind of pattern at work, and we need to just figure out what that is. And so that's what I'm interested in. Yeah.
And one of the things you've been known for saying is all stories are stories about power. And I think that's something that we definitely see in Empire City. And certain conversations in particular come to mind when it comes to like Ed O'Donnell or Carol Saphir. So I don't know if you want to speak to how what we came across also lends itself to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think the police is a story that people kind of understand is inherently political, but I do believe that every story, whether you're talking about, the ice cream truck and the song it plays, or whether you're talking about, like I said, popular culture, the Super Bowl. I mean, there's a way to talk about power with almost everything. And the question is, and those power things are there, whether you want to talk about them or not. So what has been successful for me in terms of cutting through, like you got a lot of journalists, and I respect the journalists who are just kind of giving you like the everyday beat of like, oh yeah, this happened today, these sort of like daily things. But I feel for y'all, if you really want to cut through, right, and have something that, wakes people up and pays attention, you want to bring your analysis of how it weighs in on the important issues of the day. Right? I mean, look at the stories that are winning awards out here. It ain't just somebody saying, this is what happened and, this musician. Like, I'm a hip-hop artist, right? I always teach my students. Some of the best reporting on music looks at what stuff has to do with power, how music is related to power. So obviously police are related to power. And, one of the interesting things we saw in our reporting was we wanted to go to the police museum because we figured the police museum is a really important place where the story of the history of police is being told or was told. But that museum, we found a guy who was like worked in the museum and actually set it up. And oh my God, this guy had like the wildest story. He said, they called him, his name's Ed O'Donnell, he's a historian. They called him to set up the museum. So they just had stuff in the museum, right? And he wasn't like normal museums. Everybody in the museum was a cop, the curators. And he said they almost like they didn't really, and not to diss them, but they didn't know what a museum was really. They were like, look, here's a badge, here's a car, they had all this stuff. So he was like, all right, well, so he started telling a story. He put stuff together, and when you tell the story of the NYPD, I don't know how much y'all know, but you're gonna get into some dark territory. This institution has done a lot of harm to a lot of people over the years. I mean, it's a lot. So he started to write the history, and then someone basically told him, you're not allowed to use the words violence or corruption when you talk about the NYPD. And I just want to be clear. We're talking about an institution. He's talking about the history. If you look at what's happened with the NYPD since this series dropped, I put a thread on social media. I think the day it came out, or around the day, the police commissioner stepped down because he essentially is alleged involved in a bribery, some kind of nightclub corruption scandal. The next police commissioner stepped down. The chief of police stepped down because he was involved in a scandal around overtime. By the way, the police got $1 billion of overtime last year. Not the budget, just the overtime. The chief who was involved in that, because he had, and then it was found out that another police under him who was getting some portion of that overtime, she said that was happening because she was being sexually assaulted. Or so, not sexually assaulted, yes, well, she was being sexually coerced or whatever by this particular police department. So they're working that out. We'll get the story on that. But in the meantime, he admitted that there was some type of interaction and he stepped down. This is the point I'm trying to say. This is what's happened since September 9th. Now, this guy's trying to tell the whole story of the NYPD, and he can't use the words violence and corruption. And he said literally he would hand in his narrative, and there would be a sheriff there who would cross stuff out, just cross it out, just redact it. And so, and again, this wasn't a guy who set out. I mean, this is a guy who signed up to help the police tell their story. So anyway, yeah, really interesting.
It's one of those things. It's hard to. It reminds us that you think of these institutions as they have the museum. They're the people that are doing the work of keeping the history. But it's why you need things like Empire City, because sometimes the institutions, the spaces we trust to do all that storytelling, maybe aren't doing it kind of in a full way. So with that in mind, and thinking about what voices we wanted to lift up and how to tell the story differently, we'll invite back in the conversation Alan Singer, Hofstra Professor Inasad Dandia, who's a public historian, if you want to come on up. We all made it here, yay, Belt Parkway. Alan, we'll hop to you first to just talk, when we're talking about power, when we're thinking about how we kind of got to where we are with police, propaganda is a word that comes to mind, going all the way back to the 19th century, specifically James Gordon Bennett, who is someone I know you've studied and looked at. If you could tell us a little bit about how the newspapers played a role in our understanding of power, kind of police at that time in the 19th century.
All right. Well, what James Gordon Bennett is kind of an interesting character.
Yeah.
And he has a newspaper, the New York Herald. And what he decides to do is he publishes for cheap. It's like they're called penny newspapers. And to build up his circulation, among other things, he just used racist and sexist language. But the other thing he decided, he would attack the police as incompetent. Remember I mentioned before there were the original police force, the municipal police force, really was incompetent. And he is lobbying for the state to impose this new metropolitan police force. And what happens is in 1841, there's a sensational murder of a young woman. And what he does is to spur circulation. He just builds the story and builds the story. And eventually, his campaign against the police brings the state to impose what we call the municipal police. Now, if I can just a couple other things. During this period, there were really a lot of incidents involving the police that were just inappropriate. In 1855, a young African-American woman is going to church on the New York City streetcar, and the streetcars are segregated, but she's late. She gets on a white streetcar, and the police drag her off the streetcar and arrest her in the street. In 1863, there are draft rights in the city of New York. And the rioters originally are marching down Lexington Avenue, people towards Madison Square Park, where the war profiteers are located. Well, the police protect the war profiteers, and the rioters turn on the city's black population.
I know, Chandra, you were thinking about that story about the streetcar when we were coming in today.
That's right, Elizabeth Jennings Graham. Often, like what's a more famous civil rights story than like Rosa Parks, right, down in Montgomery, and she is told to get to get to the back of the bus, and she doesn't move. But what's fascinating about Elizabeth Jennings Graham is this happened essentially like 100 years earlier in New York. And it doesn't have the kind of ending that you normally have. And I just got to take a minute to just break for a minute and say, yo, when you're telling stories like this, one of the things you got to do is bring history to life, right? You need characters. And one of the challenges we face on Empire City is we're dealing with an era before there was recorded sound. So I relied on historians, both for their knowledge, and I was so thankful for Alan, and Assad in different ways. They helped us figure out how to bring this history to life, right? How to connect it to now. And, I'm telling you, when I think about, it's wild that the whole idea of preserving archives would even be political. But when I think of archives, I was calling Alan up. Or emailing. I don't think I have your number. Emailing Alan in the middle of the night. I'm like really detailed about an archive because I want to make sure I get it right because I need the history to be bulletproof. You know what I mean? And Alan was there, and I just, give a shout out to Alan. Come on. It's your people. Y'all don't even know the work they're putting in. All right, go ahead.
No, but you have to say the end of Elizabeth's story.
Oh, wow.
Because that's why it's important.
Yeah, it's one of those, we tried to find stories, we're used to hearing Civil War stories. The person was oppressed, and this happened, and she got told in the back of the bus, and she went to jail, and look how sad everything is, right? But we wouldn't want to find those kind of stories. We wanted to say, so Elizabeth Jennings Graham, what she did, they ripped her off this subway. The cops got involved. Or the streetcar. They ripped her off again, but they didn't understand the kind of family she was from. She was from a family of black civil rights activists. So you know what they did was they said, you know what? Oh, you want to play our person? She was on the way to church, so they organized. They got together. She wrote an account. You can find the account herself in the Tribune. You can read her own words in the Tribune. They hired a lawyer. This guy, I think Chester Arthur. He eventually became like the president of the United States, but at that point he was a lawyer, and they sued. And you think I just think of the 19th century like that was just slavery times. No black person won anything back then, right? It's just in black and white, and you lose, and then you sing like a That's how I thought it went, but no. The jury came back and she won. She won, and she won money. You know what I'm saying? And people celebrated, and there's a holiday called Elizabeth Jennings Day. Give it up for Elizabeth Jennings Day. Point is, you can win even when you're fighting, and it doesn't look like you can when you fight.
So it's a great segue over to Assad, who himself found himself in the crosshairs of the NYPD kind of post 9/11, heavy surveillance happening in our country, in Muslim communities. And I'll let Assad tell us a little bit about your Elizabeth Jennings moment.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you, Chandra and Alan. It's a really hard act to follow up on, but I have a story to share with you today. I'm told that this is a room full of either people who are storytellers or people who record stories or who are interested in stories, and so it's a real honor to share mine with you on this stage. Mine is a modern story, so you've been hearing a lot about the 19th century. I want to take us to the 21st. And when I say 21st, I'm talking as recently as like 10 to 12 years ago, when I was an undergrad in college. So I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. Do we have any Brooklynites in this room? All right, got a couple of us. All right.
Brooklyn.
Oh, you too? All right, cool, yeah. It's not Biggie's Brooklyn anymore, that's for sure. So I grew up in, I guess what you would call a low-income, working-class immigrant enclave, where everybody in the neighborhood kind of knew each other. It was a very tight-knit area. And this is, post 9/11. We're talking early 2010s. I'm an undergrad at a community college, at CUNY. And my neighborhood was a type of neighborhood where everyone kind of found ways to support each other precisely because they weren't getting the kind of government assistance that, we deserved. A lot of the funding, as Chandra has talked about, was going to the cops. And so I was 18 or 19 years old, sophomore. I started a nonprofit, a charity organization to basically bring groceries to poor people, or poor families rather, in my neighborhood. And the way it worked, it was very, very simple. You might call it mutual aid today. It's a very vogue term, but my friends and I would basically gather about $10 each, throw them into a proverbial hat, and go to the local grocery store to deliver this food to families that we knew needed help, that weren't getting assistance from, our local mosque. And it was a volunteer-based group, which meant that anybody could participate. And, we started advertising our work on Facebook. This is back when young people used Facebook. And it blew up. It went viral. We had, local Muslim community leaders donating money to us from all over town. And young kids about my age wanting to volunteer with the work that I did. And I got one particular message that, that stood out to me in March of 2012, where a young man messages me on Facebook and says, "Hey, Assad, I come from a troubled background. I'm really struggling in school, and, I'm looking to get involved with a community that is grounded in faith and that is also doing service work." And he's messaging me from Jackson Heights. I live in Brighton Beach. For those of you who don't know New York City, the commute from Jackson Heights to Brighton Beach is about an hour and a half if we're talking the subway, right? And so I said, "Why don't you come down to my neighborhood, by the Atlantic Ocean, and I'll introduce you to my mosque, I'll introduce you to my friends, I'll tell you everything about the service work that we're doing, and you can come, deliver these groceries with us to these families." And so he joins my friends group, and he participates in all of our activities. And it was not an unusual thing. We had tons of people doing this. But then something wild happens. About a month later, in April 2012, someone from my neighborhood sends me a text message asking me if I'm going to be present for the evening prayers. We'll call him Mo, because he wanted to tell me something confidential, something dangerous and confidential. I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll be at the mosque." And so we meet up at the mosque, and Mo and I are leaving the mosque, and we're walking towards his car. And mind you, Mo is a little bit older than me, and he's in his late 20s. I'm 19. We walk up to his car, and he asks me if I have my phone on me. I say, "Yeah." He says, "Can I see your phone?" I give him my phone, and he turns it off. He takes his phone, and he turns it off, and he wraps them both in a cloth, and he opens up his car trunk. And he tosses the cloth in his trunk, and he shuts it. And he says, "I need to speak to you without these present." Now, Mo happens to be a police officer. He was off duty, right? I should also add some context. This was someone I knew from my neighborhood. So this wasn't just like some random, guy, right? Somebody I knew, I was close with, almost like an older brother figure to me. And we get in his car, we're chit-chatting and whatnot, and eventually he starts asking me questions about my organization, my charities, like how's your work going, what are you up to these days? I said, yeah, we're doing great. We have a clientele of like 15 families that we're delivering food to. We're hitting all 5 boroughs. You know, people are doing shifts to make these deliveries. We're going to have to expand our work, get donations, yada, yada. And he stops his car, and he says, he looks, you know, both to his left and to his right, says, Assad, there's no easy way for me to say this to you, but you're being watched. I said, what are you talking about? He said, Assad, I just came back from the precinct earlier today. There's a file with your name and your photos in it. The police are trailing you as we speak. I can only do so much to protect you from the inside, but you need to take care of yourself. I later learned that he was having his own troubles with the police. He was an observant Muslim. He wanted to grow out his beard, and the NYPD, were not letting him do so. And so he's spoiler alert, he has since left the force. But he told me all of this, and mind you, I'm guessing some of you in this room are undergrads, right? Or maybe most of you. So I was around your age, maybe even younger than you, 19 years old. Community college student, and I just got told by a police officer that the world's largest, wealthiest, and most powerful police department is trailing me, and that there's a file specifically with my name on it and my pictures in it. I've been identified as a target. I mean, what would you do, right, if somebody told you that at the age of 19? So I go home. I have no idea what, I'm not going to tell my parents. You come from an immigrant family and you come home with a B on your report card, your mom's going to have a panic attack. I'm going to walk into our apartment and say, hey, Ma, the NYPD is following me. No, I didn't tell my parents. I obviously can't call the police because they're the perpetrators here, right? So I call my friends and I say, hey, I just got this news. Let's keep an eye out and you just be mindful. And my friends were, we're all we had somewhat of an idea that the Muslim community was being surveilled. There had been news articles, but really, when it happens to you, it's no longer just this abstract policy, because you hear these things in the news and it's this is terrible and so on. But when it happens to you directly, it goes from abstract to concrete. And so we were like, okay, we'll keep an eye out. 2 weeks later, about a week and a half later, somebody else from my neighborhood, we'll call him Ali, and Ali's younger than me. He's 17. He says, I need to speak to you, bro. Can you come to my house? And can you come specifically into the basement? I said, okay. The basement was empty, just a bunch of folding chairs in there, some construction going on. I said, okay, well, why does he want me to speak to him in his basement? So I go to Ali's house, and we go to his basement, and it's just him and I and maybe one more friend. He says, okay, bro, I don't know how to say this, but I've been talking to somebody who's training to be a detective with the NYPD, and they say they've seen photos of us doing our charity work.
Wow.
Again, right? So now I've heard from another source. Ali and Mo don't know each other. These are two different people, right, who are both Muslim Americans, both New Yorkers, telling me that they have heard from their sources that our organization is being surveilled.
Wow, I'm real curious to hear, so how did it play out?
So, Ali tells me there's more. I say, oh great, what more do you have? He says, well, apparently we've also been identified as a code orange threat. Now, what is a code orange threat? Well, the NYPD had threat levels. It went from green to yellow to orange to red. So we were one level below Osama bin Laden, more or less, right? You can laugh, it's okay. It was meant to be funny. And so we're like, oh my God, this is actually really scary. And so we decided that we're going to have an event. We had an event scheduled for June of that year. Speaking of hip-hop, Chandra is going to love this. We had invited a former hip-hop artist, a man named Napoleon, who was part of Tupac's entourage, who, after Tupac was assassinated, or allegedly assassinated, he might still be out there in Cuba somewhere. After Tupac was allegedly assassinated, Napoleon converted to Islam. and he moved to Medina in Saudi Arabia, became a pious Muslim, and we were young, practicing Muslim kids, very inspired by his story, and so we invited him to Brooklyn. We had the hall was set up, we paid the honorarium and all of that. We were like, we got this event scheduled for June, and we're really excited for it. Why don't we follow through with that event, and then we're just going to shut down the organization? We're scared. We had the event. And it was a huge success. Everybody loved Napoleon. Everybody loved, talking to this guy who was, if you watch any of Tupac's videos, his posse, he's always in the videos, right? And so we were like, we're meeting somebody who was homies with Pac, who's now a Muslim, right? A pious Muslim. And so we were on cloud nine, and we decided we're not going to stop the work that we're doing. We're just going to keep doing our charitable endeavors, and we just kept going with it.
And then you saw something on Facebook.
Yes. Fast forward to, so this is 2012, just to give you more social context for those of you who may not have a memory of this time. 2012, two major things were happening locally and globally. Number one, you had Occupy Wall Street, right, which were these protests in downtown Manhattan that spread all over the world, in defiance of big banks and billionaires getting all these bailouts. The other big thing that was happening was the Arab Spring. Protests erupting all throughout the Middle East and North Africa. These young people who were my age or younger standing up to some of the worst authoritarians in the world. And so all of us were very politically awakened, right, or awakening. And, we're coming home one day from a food delivery in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and I get a text message on my way home from a food delivery telling me to check Facebook. And it's urgent, apparently. So, my friend and I, he stopped his car. We both look up Facebook on our phone, and the first thing I see when I open up Facebook is a Facebook status. It's a status by the young man who had messaged me in March from Jackson Heights. First two sentences. I was an informant sent by the NYPD to investigate terrorism. He's basically confessing, right? And it's about 2 paragraphs long. And in his confession, he just reveals everything. That every moment that he was with us was a pretend act, right? This guy met my parents, ate my mom's food, traveled with me all throughout the country. We slept over, we prayed together, we cried together. All of it was a performance by him so that he could get closer to me, to surveil me, my family, and my community. And in his confession, he says that there are others and that you should also come out and confess. So apparently, all these events that we were having, he wasn't the only informant in attendance. There were many more. And so he's saying, y'all should also come out, get out of this. All right. Now, I'm sure one of the questions in your mind is, did he do this out of kindness or benevolence towards us? Not necessarily. My perspective is that he felt like he got played by the police and he wanted to get out. This was someone who was caught on drug possession charges. I might be jumping ahead just a little bit. I just want to mention this last part. But this was someone that was caught on drug possession charges. And the cops basically went up to him and said, either you can face 15 years or you spy for us. And he did the latter, right? Maybe that's the thing that most people would do in his circumstance. And I guess he eventually snapped and he confesses.
And that's, when I first heard Assad's story, which you hear, in our show, it was like...
Episode 7.
Yeah. Really powerful. It relates to something that happened to my father. My father had a very similar thing happen to him all the way back in 1964. But I'm very quickly, because I know folks have questions, and I want to make sure we have a chance to hear from folks. How did this play out? Because I think this one also played out in ways. How did you react? And as quick as you can, how did this play out? Because I know it also had an unlikely ending.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you mentioned, Elizabeth Jennings Graham and her story, because this is not a sob story. There's a reason why I'm here in front of you on this stage right now, because, spoiler alert, we fought back, right? About that, maybe around that same month or maybe a week later, fall of 2012, I get a call from CUNY Law School, or an email from CUNY Law School inviting me to meet them in their offices. And I meet them in their offices, and I tell them what happened to me, and I give my story. And the lawyer sitting in that room, she says, Assad, there's a reason why we called you here. We've been working on a lawsuit to sue the NYPD for many years. And we're talking to many impacted community members. We can't tell you who they are because of attorney-client privileges and protections, but we want you to be a lead plaintiff in the lawsuit. We want you to kind of be the face of this. I felt like I was being recruited to the Avengers, right? You had all these people that were spied on by the cops in different circumstances, different situations. All of us were Muslim New Yorkers, and we're all being recruited to join this team. But I'm also a 19-year-old undergrad who has biology homework due the next day and 19-year-old things to think about. I had never met a lawyer in my life up until that point. The people in my neighborhood, they were shopkeepers, cab drivers, construction workers. This is a low-income working class community. What am I gonna what am I gonna do with a lawyer? I don't even know. My conceptual world couldn't even conceive what I was being proposed. So I said, can I get some time to think about this? She told me to go home, come back in 2 weeks, and I went home, and, I thought about it a little bit, came back, and I was introduced to this woman named Hina Shamsi, who introduced herself as the National Security Director of the ACLU. I said, okay, I knew who the ACLU was, right? And she said, this is not just going to be a local case, Assad. You're going to have the full backing of the country's largest civil liberties law firm. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm feeling a lot more comfortable now, right? I'm gonna have a Rolodex of attorneys, literally backing me on this case. Right? And so I said, okay, sign me up. And we officially signed up in fall of 2012, and we launched in June of 2013.
And you won.
Yeah. So the lawsuit, it was basically the entirety of my undergrad. So we filed in June of 2013. It was a really wild day for me because I gave a huge speech in front of One Police Plaza, which is the NYPD headquarters, one of the ugliest buildings downtown. Forgive me if you like brutalist architecture. I'm not a fan. And a couple hours later, I was on my way to the airport because my mother and my sister and I were going to make pilgrimage to Mecca. The minor pilgrimage. So, I in my mind, I'm thinking, the tabloids, right, are going to frame it as, Muslim boy sues cops, flees to Saudi Arabia. Thankfully, they weren't smart enough to do that. But the moment I get to the airport, I'm getting my boarding pass, and the guy, poor sap, the guy sitting in front of me, is taking him a little bit longer to process my boarding pass. And as soon as I get my passport, he eventually lets out a nervous smile when he sees my name pop up, and he gives me my boarding pass, and I notice a quadruple S on my boarding pass. Has anyone ever gotten that on their boarding pass at the airport? You got one person. 2 people. Okay, count your blessings. If you've never even heard of this, count your blessings. SSSS stands for Secondary Selective Security Screening. You get that at the airport if you're a person of special interest. So the news reached, the authorities at the airports that here's this major lawsuit that just happened. You might want to check this guy. So I got the special selective security screening conversation on my way to make pilgrimage. We came back. We're flying through. I have to tell this part of the story because this connects. We're flying through Egypt on the eve of a military coup. So everybody's fleeing the country. We land in New York. The plane is, after the plane parks, and back then planes would park properly, no crashes, no issues, right? The plane parks, and nobody's getting off the plane, and I'm like, what's going on here? Why is nobody getting off the plane? We're stable, we're seated, and I look up ahead, and I see federal agents at the gates, and they're finally allowing people to get off, and you already know where I'm going with this, right, sister? We reached the gates, and my younger sister was with me. We have the same last name. They look at her passport, and they're like, "Are you with anybody?" And I'm like, "Yeah, she's with me." And I swear to God, all of the agents, they all look at each other, and they make that face like, "Oh, we found our man." All right. please come with us, sir. And they could not wait to interrogate me. While we're walking to the interrogation room, they're like, do you know what happened in Egypt? Or what? Do you have anything to do with the military coup? And then we get into the interrogation room. Might have been half the size of this room. It's all brown people in there. And I had like one Greek dude, and I felt so bad. I was like, why? Yeah. They want to make it look like they're not racist, and so they got this one like Greek-looking guy, and in my mind I'm like, man, he doesn't belong here, get him out of here. None of us belong there, right? But I'm very big on dark humor, in case you can't. Yeah. So I'm getting interrogated now, me and my mother, and I'll tell you this, my mother was the bravest person in that room. And my mother went up to these federal agents, and federal agents this is a different ball game, right? And she said, give me my damn phone call. You can't keep me in here without letting me have a phone call. And they eventually relent, and she calls my dad, who was outside, and lets him know like what's going on. And then she makes another demand. She says, you're going to go through our luggage, and I demand to be present while you're going through it, including our suitcases. And I'm whispering to my mom, like, Mom, relax, it's okay. And she looks at me, she says, no, son, they could plant something in our suitcase and call us terrorists. They're not going to go through that shit, without me seeing it. And I was like, all right, you got it, Ma. I'll let you you take it over. And they go through our luggage, and they're literally going through your dirty laundry. It's a very humiliating experience. And my mom's watching them the whole time, and eventually they let us go. My dad, he picks us up, and he says, guess who called while you were away? So the NYPD? He says, no, the FBI. So now the NYPD and the FBI are collaborating through this thing called the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, to retaliate against me. And I'll skip through the rest of it. I'll let you hear it on the podcast. But basically, for 4 years, I had to deal with this kind of harassment against me, my family, my friends, until finally in April of 2016, I walk into a courtroom and making my case, and the NYPD and their lawyers are making their case. And we come out. I'm still an undergrad, by the way, so I'm a college senior at this point. I go to class. I had like NBC News following me to class, and I'm trying to get my reflection paper done on the subway, which was overdue. And I go to class, and a couple months after that, it's 2016, so we know what happened that year, right? Nationally. I get a call from my lawyers who tell me the arguments that we make. They call me and they say, we have good news, Assad. I say, what's the good news? He said that the judge said that our arguments were not strong enough and our demands were not strong enough against the police.
Which is, I've never heard anything like that in my
heard
life.
that, right?
Judge says, say more, right? Make more, more demands.
Exactly. So this is an extraordinarily rare circumstance. To give you more context, the judge's name was Judge Charles Haidt. He had presided over another surveillance case in the 70s. So he had been doing this for 50 years. So I guess he got tired of it. He was like, I can't keep coming back. It was another community. It was an anarchist group, Asian anarchist group that had sued the cops along with the Black Panthers and so on. Anyways, we're like, okay, we'll go back to the courtrooms and to the drawing board and make a stronger case and stronger demands, and we eventually did that. But then in November, Donald Trump wins the election, and the judge has not yet signed off on our demands. So there's another battle to be fought in that Trump could change the judge. Right, and so we literally had from November to January, that window, to get the judge to sign off on the demands before Trump is inaugurated. We didn't sue for money, by the way. I kind of wish we did. Right. But we sued for policy change. I did not become rich through this. I actually probably lost a lot of money because of all the transportation fees. Anyways, a couple of days before Trump is inaugurated, I kid you not, the judge finally signs off on the demands. The surveillance unit called the Demographics Unit, which was a unit that the NYPD had to surveil people of like 25 different countries, all of which were Muslim-majority countries, plus Black Americans. Those are the two groups that they had designated. So if you were from one of these Muslim-majority countries or you were a Black American, you were basically under the Demographics Unit. That unit got abolished. We got 6 or 7 other policy changes, which I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A. But literally a couple of days before Trump is inaugurated. Yeah. He gets inaugurated that Friday. What's the first policy that he passes? It's round 1. Anyone remember? the Muslim ban.
Right, that's right. And you know, so first of all, let me just jump in here because we have like a few minutes for Q&A. First of all, let's
share some love about it. If you're interested in asking a question, because we have such little time, if you want to pop up to the mic in the center, you can. Chandra, continue on.
Yeah. So as you think of your questions, please come up now because we want to get it going. But I just want to say, first of all, can we give Assad a really big round of applause and love? I mean, not only has Assad lived this, he also is forced to tell his story in these contexts where you don't have enough time to even tell. I mean, what you got is still the condensed version of this story. Also, I just got to shout Assad out and say, Assad is an extremely talented tour guide who is a historian in his right. He's a professor. He's just an all-around talented individual. But yes.
Yeah, Kelsey, go ahead.
I was wondering if you could speak to the history of, or if this came up in your research at all, the history of police censorship of portrayals in police procedurals in the history of television, maybe starting with Dragnet, or and what your thoughts on how that's shaped public perception of the force.
Absolutely. Thanks for this really smart question, Kelsey. And I would also say, if we have a number of other questions or a couple other questions, we might want to take more than one at a time.
Yeah. Feel free to pop up.
Yeah, but on that one, but on the police procedurals, you know, it's interesting. Police procedurals actually have evolved in a way where they show, if you think about it, a lot of them show problems in police departments, right? But one of the ways that they kind of protect the system of policing is that it is kind of like a bad apple narrative, even if there's sometimes a lot of bad apples. Often, this was a surprising thing when I researched that history, it's usually the detectives who are wind up being like the kind of, like the police are kind of cast as like, you know, negative thugs, and there's like some detective, like you think about McNulty in The Wire, right, who himself, even though he's kind of like a little shaky, he's the one who's restoring the justice of the system. Kind of like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, right? He's going to get involved in all these things, but ultimately redeem the institution. But I would say that there's a real long history of cops in pop culture. Really, like in the 20s, actually, a group of police chiefs went to Hollywood to complain about how they were being portrayed, because they were being portrayed as fools. So it's a really interesting lens into it, and I think it does influence how a lot of people think about it.
Also, in the past couple of decades, it has been notable that the casting has been such that they'll typically put a person of color in the role of like chief or captain, because then it kind of gives off the impression, if you will, like, look, this can't be racist. Look who's in charge. So there has been a lot of look at and study into the fact like that those are very intentional choices being made. By the way,
one of the most best pieces of media about cops and TV is made by Diane Hodson. It's called Running from Cops, and Dan Taberski. You watch it.
Listen
to it. It's incredible.
Yeah, we did a deep dive and on the TV show Cops.
Blew my mind. All right.
It's not for all. Yes, go ahead.
What's going on?
Hey, Bob. My name is Thurgood.
Thurgood, what's up?
Assad, I have a question. Did you find out that the cops were listening to your conversations through your phone?
Yeah. So in the legal process, and they should have given me a law degree being involved in all of that, because it was very lengthy and annoying. I couldn't delete any text messages because there's a process called discovery where basically the lawyers go through the cops' communications and my communications, and I had learned that the police handler of the informant who was sent to spy on me mentioned me by name 96 times between the month of March and October. Nobody's talked about me that much except the police. I don't know why you're talking about me 96 times as a 19-year-old community college student. I wasn't all that interesting. But yeah, I found out that they were talking about me. I was mentioned by name all these times. I still haven't seen the specific file from that precinct. I'm very curious if they got any footage of me like they did with your dad. That I haven't seen yet. But we got confirmation through the legal proceedings that I was mentioned all those times. Yeah.
Thank you, Thurgood.
Thanks, Thurgood.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm a journalism student. I'm also a Brooklynite from the Brighton Beach area, actually. One of my friends from Brooklyn said that trust in authority is difficult for us, and it reminds me of something that one of my other friends in the New York press corps said, that accountability is so difficult because of the recent encryption from the New York police radio. So it's accountability is so much more difficult. Where do you see the path to rebuilding trust and accountability, if at all, looks like for us in the future?
Is that for me or for
anybody?
I'm curious to see if you have any brief thoughts on that, Alan. what you think about that?
Yes. Very quick.
Yes.
I was a high school teacher in Brooklyn. I taught at Franklin K. Lane and other schools. And in order to have credibility in Brooklyn, high school teacher, you got to be able to rap.
Reese's
Kids used to call me Reese's Pieces because I was better than Eminem. So it's time to tell the truth about police history. Let's tell the real story. Some cops are good, care about the hood, but the system is the problem. It's what I understood. I think that's the
All right.
I don't know if that answers your question.
I love
the
that.
system is the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing I would say that is worrisome is that those institutions that would sort of oversee accountability are being attacked. For example, FOIA, which is one of the ways you get documents that journalists rely on, that these cases rely on. Those institutions are kind of being gutted right now by Elon Musk and others. So, yeah, that's unfortunate.
All right. Thank you. Well, I know we had very short time for the Q&A, so I just want to quickly say a thank you to everyone who made this possible. Thank you to all of our guests here, Assad, Alan, Chandrai. Huge thank you to the Hofstra Cultural Center who made this possible, Lawrence Herbert School for Communication, the Center for Civic Engagement, the Center for Race, Culture, and Social Justice, and the Department for Radio, Television, and Film. If you have any questions for these guys, we'll be hanging around for a minute just right out here, so feel free to bend our ear. Thank you all.